And we're live.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Inside Movies Galore. I am one of your hosts, but today we are apparently continuing our Halloween month, slash birthday month, I guess, because we've had a couple of birthdays in here. But we are bringing ourselves to an old windmill to tell you a story. But I have another friend of mine in here, Forrest. Why don't you tell us what's a movie we have discussed or have watched for tonight?
All right, thank you very much, Dave. This week on Inside Movies Galore, we are discussing 1931's Frankenstein, directed by James Whale, based on the novel by Mary Shelley, and released by Universal Studios. The story as goes: Dr. Frankenstein dares to tamper with life and death by creating a human monster out of lifeless body parts. So let's go. I'm going to go around. I'm going to go clockwise from my left. Jake, is this your first time seeing Frankenstein?
No, this is definitely not a first watch of this one. I will admit that I probably did not see this one in its entirety until my college or early post-college years, but I could not swear to that. I know that growing up, definitely I was familiar with the basic story. I did see Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. I did see Young Frankenstein quite early, which is a favorite of mine, no doubt about it. And I've probably seen bits and pieces over the years, but it's just one of those ones. It's like such a part of the background of your of life and pop culture that it's like I couldn't swear to it that I've seen Bride of Frankenstein. I wouldn't swear that I haven't, but but it's just one of those things. So it's like I'm definitely familiar with the basic idea. I feel like I read excerpts from the book, but I don't think I've read the whole book either. But as far as a definitive viewing, this is probably the third or fourth time I've seen the movie, and probably the first time in a few years. And I like it well enough. I think it's for its time, it was probably a very important. Well, I know it was an important film for its time, and definitely a lot of films come back to this one. But when you're watching the movie itself, it feels kind of slight to me. You know what I mean? Like it feels like I always go in expecting more than I get. But it's still a good movie, and it was fun to revisit it.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Jake. Over you, Kroll. Is this your first time watching Frankenstein?
Oh, no. I've seen it many times. I can't tell you exactly the first time. I know I was very young, maybe too young to even remember. Um, every time I see it, though, it feels different because there's so many different Frankensteins. I get them mixed up sometimes. You know,
Mhm.
like there's Frankenstein's castle in some of them, and this one he's just in a windmill, and it's still absolutely great film. Absolutely love it. I love the Bride of Frankenstein. I've definitely seen that. Son of Frankenstein, Young Frankenstein, which is different comedy, but awesome, great. 1938, this film, but it is just absolutely phenomenal. I'm not a fan of black and white, but it was perfect, just perfect, and I don't think a color version would be better at all.
No, I think black and white definitely set the tone. Definitely made set, even though in pop culture you kind of see these characters in color, but black and white really set the tone sets the tone for it. Over to you, Brandon. Is this your first time watching Frankenstein?
No. I think like most people, we all had introduction to scenes. I mean, who doesn't know the whole "It's alive, alive," that whole thing.
Mhm.
Which I think Weird Science was the first time I heard that, or Muppet Babies. Don't hold me on either, because they both like to use those clips a lot.
Right. I know Muppet Babies was heavy on Universal Studio monster movie references.
So I mean, I do know that almost a lot of the iterations of Frankenstein that I had known in pop culture all came from this adaptation. I read the actual novel in college and really enjoyed that and thought this is pretty deep. But that's not what the film seems like. So I had to get a hold of the film and watch that, and I was like, this is very different. Um, and that kind of turned me off to it a little bit because the book was so much better and it had so much more to say. I remember even watching a play with Benedict Cumberbatch in it, where he and another, I can't think of the other actor that worked aside from him. They would actually play off of it so that sometimes it would be him playing the monster, and then sometimes it would be the other guy playing the monster. They would kind of switch off. So I thought it was a really, what's the word? I always thought it was really interesting to see that story play out from a different angle. But if I was to look at the original Frankenstein
I,
canon, Abbott and Costello and Bride of Frankenstein would be my favorite for sure on those. But this one was good in what it did and bad in what it did. So it just depends on how you look at it.
I saw that same play version when it was as a Fathom event in theaters, and it was directed by Danny Boyle, which is pretty impressive. And the version I saw had Benedict Cumberbatch as Victor Frankenstein.
I saw the one where he was the monster, so that's kind of, see, there you go.
Be interesting to compare the two.
Mhm.
All right, and now we'll segue over to Dane. Over to you, Dane. Sure, is that all Brandon, or
Yep, I'm good.
okay?
Thanks.
On that note, let's segue over to you, Dane. Is this your first time seeing Frankenstein?
Definitely not. I grew up with this and with a lot of the Universal monster films. Pretty foundational part of my childhood, I have to say. When James Rolfe, when he talked about the history of horror films in the very first Monster Madness, and he spent so much time on the Universal monsters, I was like, yeah, I was right there, because that was my introduction to horror, really. Now, as far as the Universal monsters themselves, I think that Universal made this definitely took what Dracula did in the same year and kind of elevated it to the next level in terms of production and everything. I do think Universal made better ones after this. Like my favorite was Creature from the Black Lagoon, um, but it's a very significant entry in their Universal Monster series. um, Now I much, much, much prefer the Mary Shelley's original novel, which is very different from this. To me,
Mhm.
that's Frankenstein. The version of Frankenstein in this film and in the popular consciousness is such a far cry from who the monster really is and who Victor Frankenstein really is. Both of them are so much better than what this film gives them. But that being said, this film does hit a lot of the basics. It's just heavily truncated because it was based on the play adaptation more so than the original novel. Same with Dracula, same thing based on the
Mhm.
play. Um, but this one, unlike Dracula, you could definitely tell it was based on the play because it's so interior. This one does get outside a lot more, and it has more spectacle, like with the burning windmill and everything.
Mhm.
So it is more cinematic on that front. But yeah, I mean, compared to the book, this is nowhere near as good. But for what it is and what it did for horror as a genre and what it did for the popular consciousness, its influence is up there with something like Snow White or The Wizard of Oz in terms of 1930s cinema. You know, it's so iconic and so well known that it permeates all of culture. So it has to be given a whole humongous heaping of praise for that reason.
I thank you for that. Agree. So much on that note, especially at the end about like how about 1930s film and iconography. Over to you, Mo. Is this your first time watching? Is this your first time watching Frankenstein?
Oh no, very similar to a lot of you guys. I've been pretty much seeing them my whole life. They were just kind of those movies that were always around, right? You'd see them on TV occasionally, or they were just stupid easy to find on VHS for a while. And so I've seen it countless times over the years, but I guess as I started getting into like more hardcore horror, neglected them for a lot of years. And then some years back, I don't even know how long ago it was, I started getting really like into the Universal Monsters stuff again, because all of the shit that I like in movies is just crap that they kind of originated in these films back in the day, and progressively were done better over the years. But just like a lot of the sets and the effects and the vibes and all that stuff, you can trace it all the way forward to shit like Jason Lives and stuff like that. So it's just, I developed a new appreciation for him, I guess you could say, a few years back. So I try to hit them. I usually do a Universal session about once a year. So I watched this right around this time last year, I think, and it was an absolute treat to revisit. I'm kind of endlessly fascinated with just the whole everything about Frankenstein, how hardcore it was for its day in terms of like dead kids and chucking dudes off of windmills and shit. And just the way everything looks has this strange quality to it. I don't know if I'm not too schooled on the science of like cameras and frame rate and however they shot this movie, but it almost has like a feel of like you're seeing documentary footage at times, just the way people move and stuff. So that was my main takeaway from it this time, was like, damn, this is a really fluidly shot movie.
Totally. Well, the what you said there with the this and Dracula both were pretty controversial for their time. This even more so, not just because of like a child being killed, but also like the blasphemy with now I know what it's like to be God and all that stuff. But it's also hugely influential in ways that you don't even expect. Like Night of the Living Dead owes its very existence to this interpretation of Frankenstein's monster with the arms outstretched in the movement, and the fact that the dead rise because of a ray of some kind that's kept really vague, just like it is here.
Yeah, man. And I mean, even just, like, I guess you could say the way certain things are shot, or that kind of like semi-gothic atmosphere of a lot of the stuff is definitely straight up copied and shit. Like Castle Freak has several shots where it just copies the bit where Frankenstein is chained up. And having just recently watched that, like not too long ago before this revisit of Frankenstein, it was really striking. Like, damn, they practically could have like overlaid it on top of that scene from Castle Freak and it would match right up, which is awesome. I mean, the shadows behind him as he's clanking the chains around. There's just so many little things about Frankenstein that I love, man. All the sets are pretty awesome. When they fucking burn down that windmill, it's pretty sweet. I mean, it's just, for its time, definitely a special effects extravaganza. And it's nice and tightly paced, I think. It doesn't waste any time. None of these really do for the most part, because they all kind of run right around 70 to 75 minutes, like we said earlier in the chat. So
some are just barely over an hour.
Yeah. But yeah, I love it, man. I mean, it was a treat to revisit it. So thank you, Forrest, for suggesting it. I don't think we could have timed it better. This is a perfect time to talk about Frankenstein. So I'm hyped on it.
Especially like a perfect closer for the month.
Yeah.
Season.
Easily.
Yeah, this was back when the American Film Institute, when they did their original top 100 movies, American
Frankenstein was
movies.
on there.
Yes, it was. And then they took it off and they revised it, which is stupid. But that says a lot. And it makes sense as to why, because it has permeated the culture so much and in ways that most people don't even know about.
Yeah, of the original like flagship Universal monster movies for the main monsters, I think this one's probably had the most wide-reaching influence on horror. That's not even evil, like Living Dead related or anything,
Yeah, I would say horror and pop
Yeah.
culture in general.
Yeah.
Well, what is Halloween without Universal monsters, really? At least these days, anyhow.
I mean, I would say I remember like I would go to the grocery store around Halloween time, and I'd see displays set up with Frankenstein's monster over a stack of Budweisers, or just like on Halloween decorations, or like you go to Universal Studios and see like makeup tests and or watch Frankenstein perform with Beetlejuice live.
Yeah, we're blessed being like part in the 90s growing up of like another wave of like resurgence in Universal monsters, because they put them all out on VHS. I feel like you saw the stuff pop up all the time in like different pop culture cartoons and things like that.
Yeah.
Didn't the Turtles do a whole line of Ninja Turtles they were the Universal monsters?
Yeah, they
I
did
like
with
the Frankenstein and the Dracula one.
Yeah, they did.
Monster
Michelangelo
Squad.
was the monster.
Well, and don't forget, there are a lot of metal and horror people who really hate Rob Zombie, but love him or hate him, he genuinely loves old school horror, especially Frankenstein, especially the monsters, which he's obviously making into a movie now, and seems to be doing it faithfully from what all I can see. But it's like, the fact that he was who he was in that formative time of the 90s, as those monster films were kind of experiencing something of a renaissance, sort of. But he was one of the forces that was helping to keep it alive, and we need more people nowadays to do that.
Yeah, I mean, more movies would help, but they've fucked that up several times. So.
Because they keep trying to make them into popcorn blockbusters instead of horror movies.
Except for The Invisible Man, which was really good.
I really enjoyed that too.
Yeah, I've heard that one's good, and The Wolfman was good, but then we
The
got
Wolfman's the best.
The Mummy.
I love Rob Zombie's music and his movies, so I'm definitely in the camp of more Rob Zombie. So
I dig him well enough, I think if he wasn't Rob Zombie, they'd just like the people that don't like him would just ignore them. But because he is Rob Zombie, it's like cool to hate on him.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I mean, I like him well enough, and the ones that I don't like, I just haven't fucking watched again. There's tons of other good shit to watch.
Exactly.
The Tom Cruise version of The Mummy, I call it The Mummy Impossible.
Oh, that is stupid. That was the worst.
I had a copy
ever.
And I was going to send it to Brandon because I was like, one of them might not have it. And then I listened to my better judgment and just threw it in the fucking trash.
That's where it belongs. That is exactly where it belongs.
That's what I've heard.
It's just horrible. It's just absolutely not worth the watch. It's just
Thank God I got it as a gift and I held on to it.
I just watched it.
I saw it on the big screen, but I saw it with one of those movie tickets that you buy a Blu-ray and you got the ticket to see the movie.
Right.
I saw it that way, so I was like, yeah, this is not good, but it didn't cost me any money, so.
There you go.
At least it didn't cost you. Did ruin a free ticket, though.
Yeah, I mean, when I worked for the movie theater, I saw Paul Blart Mall Cop 2, and I got free movies at the time, and I still felt cheated. So
yeah, they should pay you to watch that shit.
Exactly.
You wasted 2 hours of my life. I want them back.
Exactly.
That's how I felt about Napoleon Dynamite.
Blasphemy.
I love Napoleon Dynamite.
I don't understand how people love it, but
it's an acquired taste.
Yeah, me. I definitely did not acquire it.
Okay, thank you for that, Mo. Over to you, Dave. Is this your first time watching Frankenstein?
No, this is definitely not my first time watching Frankenstein, and I love all of the Universal films. I think these were the Marvel universe of the film franchise for
Absolutely.
many years. And I also like the backstory behind this. I actually read the annotated Frankenstein at one point in time, which there was something of that way before Dracula's annotated one it came into existence, where there was actually someone who actually like tracked down like where Frankenstein might have actually been, and as far as like where it started, where it was locationally, where it was mapped in the universe. That was something else. But I like the story behind it because Mary Shelley, she like stayed at like some residence, and because she couldn't sleep at night, she overheard her husband like speaking about the life, what happens after life and death, and bang, she bangs out a story, So
Well, and it was a challenge from her husband and their writing
Byron.
friends as to writing a horror story, and she not only wrote that, but she ended up pioneering a whole other genre, what we now call science fiction, and happened to write one of the best novels in the English language. So, kind of had she really, but the sad part is that outside of that, a lot of her other literary contributions were a lot of travelogues and things like that. In terms of fiction, I mean, she was kind of a one-hit wonder.
Well,
If you
also at
want
the
to see,
time,
Mhm.
I was going to say at
Again,
the time, it
what
was
but what a great one to do.
yeah, right. It was amazing that she, as a female writer, even got the book out there in the first place. And I noticed when this film started that it said based on the book by Mrs. Percy Shelley, and I'm like,
Oh wow.
It was
little face palm.
1931,
I
man.
know, but it was
And
still
if you
face palm.
if
Well,
you want to
it's
see a good
also
film by this, a good film about this, Gothic is a good horror interpretation and a very
Hmm.
surrealist horror of her night where she came up with the book. It's one of my wife's favorites. We'll have to cover it one time.
And there are
okay.
so many film adaptations of this film. It's not even possible to like entirely like keep them all in like one track mind. I mean, there was even a stage adaptation involving none other than Kroll's favorite Star Wars chick, Leia, played one in a version of Frankenstein that I
Carrie Fisher.
Yep,
Nice.
Carrie Fisher. Carrie Fisher played in a version of Frankenstein in the 70s. So
Yeah,
I gotta watch that if I
there have been
haven't
quite a
seen it
few
already.
stage. There have been quite
it
a few stage adaptations.
but yeah, Frankenstein. I love the idea of bringing the dead back to life, and to be honest, Frankenstein is the king of the zombies. You cannot. He was the first zombie. In fact,
Precursor to the
I
undead.
wouldn't even call him a zombie. I would call him the undead.
Yeah, I wouldn't call him a zombie either
No.
because he's a resurrected man, but he's
Well,
too
He
and
doesn't
then
intelligent.
have appetite for flesh.
in the book, it was like he was like reborn as like a different man.
It's like
Yeah.
he can think and I mean he's a little slow, but he can think and stuff. And
He
Well,
can think and
zombies can't
articulate.
think. Zombies
Well, and
are just
here's the biggest thing, the biggest beef that I have with the popular consciousness of the monster versus the monster in the book. The monster in the films and in most adaptations is not that smart, or at least not right away. Partially, it's because the stories on film start and stop it when he's like a newborn per se. But then in the novel, he gets more time to not only learn language and everything, but to understand the human condition and everything. And he can speak beautifully. He has a very elevated vocabulary, as does Victor Frankenstein. And so it's such a that's better than any zombie that I've ever seen in anything, and better than the other Frankenstein's adaptations that I've seen. But there are some that do get to that point, and I appreciate that. But I always
This
feel bad that the
They do
popular
have him.
consciousness, they don't get that.
this movie at the time brought in with people's fears of the unknown, and that's the thing. That girl drowned, but how the hell did they know it was the monster who did it? This type of thing. I mean, no one was nearby when he threw her into
Well, they didn't they didn't they didn't
pointed
know
fingers.
they didn't know it was the monster. They said it was the murderer.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I thought long and hard about that this time watching it because I was actually watching it with my kid
Yeah.
though, and she
How'd
was
they
like, "What? She
know?"
doesn't know how to swim? She lives right by a lake." And then that kind of clicked. It was like, "Oh, that's how they obviously know someone chucked her in the lake because she's lived by the lake her whole life." And I don't imagine her falling in and drowning as a regular occurrence.
Right. So
That is a good
a lot of it plays on the fears of small townsfolk mindset. The fact that if something goes wrong, whether it be plague, famine, someone disappearing, someone's going to get the blame. Someone is going to be justified in this whole thing, even if it's that beggar that's going down the street. That one's the one that we're going to crucify. And this is the kind of mindset people were in at this point in time. Point the finger, kill the killer, no matter whether he's innocent.
Evil dies
Evil
tonight.
dies tonight. Yes.
Yes.
Which, I mean, we're still in. I don't think that's something that's evergreen. I'm afraid. Paranoia and lynch mob mentalities and all that stuff. We still
Lock her
deal with
up.
that today.
I mean, I
That's
don't
just
necessarily agree with it, but it has always been a dream of mine to be like wielding a pitchfork in one of those sweet fucking mobs. Chase them to the
we all
windmill.
we all have to have a dream of some kind, don't we? But yeah, that's something that's evergreen. I think just the idea that we hate what we don't understand and fear it.
Yeah.
And
Nowadays,
that
it just
stuff.
happens more on the internet than it does in public, but it still happens in public too.
That it does.
All right. Thank you for that, Dave. Over to you, Tammy. Is this your first time watching Frankenstein?
No, this wasn't my first time. I actually, when I was a kid, I liked to watch the spooky movies. They came on, I think it was Shock Theater at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I saw a lot of these older movies because they would play them. And so that's how I became acquainted with it. I do, out of the Frankenstein movies, I actually do prefer the Mary Shelley's Frankenstein because it is. I read the book a long time ago, but I don't own it, but I read it a long time ago.
She's talking about the one with Robert De Niro.
That's what I was about to ask.
Kenneth Branagh's version, which out of all the feature film versions, that one's the closest. But it still does a lot of stuff that it doesn't need to do to make the story work.
I appreciate this one though for its time, and it's at that time the monster things were just coming out like Frankenstein and Dracula, and without having the effects and stuff that we have today, I think they did a really good job of the effects, and the story at the time was probably quite a shocker to everybody, but that's what makes a good horror movie.
Okay.
Yeah, man. I mean, there's a couple of moments in it that are still legitimately kind of heavy, when he's walking through town with the little girl. I'm sure we'll get to it later,
Yeah.
but I was sitting there watching that and I was like, damn, that would be kind of heavy in a movie today, the way it's shot with all the people like in the middle of their party and they notice them and kind of stop
Yeah.
what they're doing in shock. It's good stuff.
Well, as desensitized and as perverse and whatever as society has become in many ways, dead kids still do tend to get a reaction out of people, and for good
Right?
reason.
It works. I'm all about it in horror movies. Like, fuck them kids, kill them. Like,
Halloween
we
3.
yes.
Oh boy.
Honorable mention to The Beyond, where he just snaps a headshot on the little girl from the Wendy's logo. Oh my god.
I thought it was the Swiss. I thought it was the Swiss Miss. I thought that was the Swiss Miss.
I'll allow it.
All right. Let's get into my take on it. So since this was my pick, definitely not my first time watching it. I think by the time I was, by the time I was born, Frankenstein, the whole Frankenstein monster was, along with the rest of the Universal Studios monsters, were pretty much ingrained into pop culture. From cartoons to toys and again cardboard displays at grocery stores,
Cereal boxes.
Yes,
Yeah.
What was it, Frankenberry?
Yep.
Frankenberry, Count Chocula, and then you got Boo Berry, I think, is the other one. Isn't it?
Right.
But yeah, it was just he was just everywhere, and I remember even dressing up as Frankenstein's monster for Halloween when I was 6 years old, as the Boris Karloff version, or this version. And I remember, and then and the movie itself was probably one that I frequently borrowed from the library, along with Bride of Frankenstein, which actually personally for me is I think is the better of the two movies. But we'll get to that next. But we'll get to that in the future. I'm sure we'll get to that in a future discussion, in a future episode. But yeah, it was just a frequent watch for me. I did also read the book. Also eventually read the book too. The book is objectively is better written. But I don't know. But I don't know. I enjoy them both in their own, their own unique merits.
Yeah, they're not the same thing, but they also are. They go off on their own directions, especially since Universal's Frankenstein movies. They were a whole series, and then Hammer, they had their own series of Frankenstein movies.
I just want to interject that I've always felt like the Burke and Hare stories have kind of like been interconnected with the whole Frankenstein story myself.
Yeah, totally.
Because on the one hand, you've got Dr. Frankenstein, who apparently is like putting together this body of a dead man from like different cadavers, and that's exactly what Burke and Hare pretty much did. They didn't like create a monster, but they definitely like were in their own league of buying and selling dead bodies for their own reasons. So to me, I feel like the earlier adaptations of Burke and Hare kind of fell in line with the Frankenstein story just a little bit.
Oh yeah, and then Bride, they fully do like their version of Burke and Hare with Pretorius's little sidekicks, and it even kind of touches on how they were sort of forced into doing that stuff because of the demand for corpses by these weird doctors.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just how it went. They became murderers.
Mm-hmm.
And let's not forget that the whole metaphor of a Frankenstein's monster has entered the lexicon to mean something that, is the instrument, something that one creates that is the instrument
Beyond
of one's
control.
own downfall. Yeah.
Well,
And I thought of this just now, but one of my favorite movies of recent years was The Social Network, and how, especially given all the Facebook scandals and stuff that have come out recently, you could definitely interpret the Social Network, but also the real life Facebook story as its own kind of 21st century Frankenstein's monster, because it is kind of this all-consuming thing that
Bigger
you
than
know,
Zuckerberg himself.
exactly.
Yeah. I just got a picture of Zuck having that "it's alive" moment when he first like booted it up for the
Well, and
first time.
he kind of, if you watch The Social Network, there are a lot of parallels to Victor Frankenstein, because where did Victor Frankenstein first start to do his research? When he was in university, and he neglects his studies because he's way ahead of his peers, and he pursues this thing feverishly. It grows, it becomes alive, and it becomes something far out of his control, and all that kind of stuff. So I mean,
Actually, I would say Zuckerberg is he's more like Victor Frankenstein by way of Booger from Revenge of the Nerds.
well, that, or I would have said Charles Foster Kane.
He is a creepy looking little motherfucker too. Looks like he's probably done some grave robbing.
I would say grave robbing at the Singles Bar on a Tuesday night.
Yeah, well, but
Dude, have you ever
point-
seen that video where he's talking about smoking ribs in his backyard? It's like one of the creepiest. Yeah, I swear that guy is not human. Like, just watch that one of these days, and you'll be like, "This guy can't be a real person."
What do y'all think made them decide to have a hunchback as a helper?
Because it's awesome.
Shock value.
That's one of the biggest liberties from the. I mean, apart from how the monster came to life, that's another one of the biggest liberties taken from the book.
I think it's shock value, really. I mean, you think about it. You look at the age that we're in, and this really is the dawn of those ages. They had this individual come in and create all this circuitry and wonder, but the idea of science taking over, this was something that was starting in the 30s, took over more in the 40s, but that science and playing God, these are thoughts that were going through the public mindset back in the day. So it makes sense. And of course, like I say, I think the Hunchback was just more of add a freak in there because that will horrify people more.
Yep.
Right. And I think there's an element of it too that kind of drives home like the selfish drive of Frankenstein. Like, he could probably fix Fritz or whatever, but instead he's more concerned with meeting his own ends and creating life on its own.
Honestly, I'm just okay what happens with Fritz.
Well, it's worth noting that again, the Hunchback in this film is not Igor; it's Fritz. There is no
Igor came
Hunchback
into Frankenstein.
Yeah, I thought it was Igor too, and then I was like, oh wait, this is an Igor. Yeah, it's definitely.
Right.
He was horrible. He was horrible.
There is no.
Monster.
There's no Hunchback in the book, but I do think Brandon's point is well worth mentioning, because Todd Browning, who did Dracula the same year, what was his very next film? It was Freaks. And that was with
that one
real.
Got banned.
Yes, that was too horrifying for audiences, and that one had real people with real either deformities or abnormalities of whatever kind. And so if a Hunchback is considered to be, pretty freaky or whatever, then you have the real circus freaks in a movie called Freaks, and then that was too much for people for a long time. So, and again, this and Dracula and a lot of the early Universal Monsters canon, the film catalog, those were pre-code films. So it was prior to the Hays Code of 1934. So a lot of those things about these movies were really shocking, and things that they couldn't have done later on.
So I guess the first Igor representation of a hunchback dwarf was the laboratory assistant to the mad scientist alchemist Rotwang in the 1927 film Metropolis.
Yeah.
So I almost wonder if he called him Fritz after Fritz Lang for Metropolis.
It's possible for sure. I mean, so the story of Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein himself was
Fritz was an asshole.
Yeah, he was. Victor Frankenstein himself was from Geneva, but he was a student at the University of Ingolstadt in Germany. So it has always had a rather Germanic origin to it. This story, and so I wouldn't be surprised. Plus, a lot of the early sound filmmakers were originally from Germany because they came over to the United States to escape the Nazis, and so I wouldn't be surprised at the influences there. Although the director of this film, James Whale, was not that at all, but still, the influence is definitely there.
Well, and I like that James Whale has continued to work with Boris Karloff even after this film, like in films like The Old Dark House, if I remember correctly. Wasn't that one directed by him?
Yes, it was.
Well,
he seemed like he was like all about bringing along people he worked well with. Like in Bride, he creates a whole new role for that dude that played Fritz or whatever, just because he liked him.
Well, and that was Dwight Frye who played Renfield in Dracula.
Indeed.
And he does an amazing job in both roles. Although I would give, out of the two, I like Renfield the best just because he gets more to do.
Yeah,
and because he gets that creepy laugh,
He's got some good funny bits in Bride, so I'd probably rank that right underneath him as Renfield, and then obviously Fritz would be third place. But yeah, he's a fun dude. I could see putting him in movies. He's got a good look about him.
Yeah, well, he's honestly, I think it was Peter McNichol was in the Renfield role in Dracula Dead and Loving It, but they both
Did you
have
say
a similar...
McNichol?
No, Peter McNichol.
Damn.
Although we can pretend I said that just to.
I'm gonna go with that.
But point is, like, they both have a similar kind of look and feel to them, so that makes sense why he cast Peter McNichol there as an homage. But
and a lot of people with this particular film often tend to like misinterpret that Frankenstein isn't the name of the monster.
yes.
It's in fact the name of the scientist who created the monster.
Well, okay.
Yeah, I'll call him Frankenstein as just like shorthand if I'm mentioning it, but obviously people know.
Yeah.
I think.
Right, and also I just want to point out that another liberty that this movie took from the book. In the book, his name is Frankenstein's first name is Victor. Here, it's Henry.
It is
like David Banner versus
Henry
Bruce
Clerval
Banner.
was his friend. Yeah,
Yeah, but they
was his friend.
But they call him Henry Frankenstein in here.
Yeah, which that always pissed me off because I'm like, it's Victor, damn it. His friend's name is Henry.
Like I said, it's just like
it's like Dracula. They switch Lucy and Mina around. It's like no.
Calling him Henry,
it's like David Banner and the Hulk.
Yeah, that's
right,
stupid.
but...
That's stupid too.
I don't know. Victor has that mad scientist ring to it. Henry does it. I mean, it'd be like if you renamed Victor Von Doom to like Jeremy Von Doom or so. Well,
to be honest, the Incredible Hulk was the Frankenstein of the 70s TV shows. You know?
The character itself was inspired by Frankenstein's monster in the 60s.
Yes, he was.
It's a shame we never got shredded Frankenstein with Lou Ferrigno. That would have been sweet.
Yeah,
you're making me angry. Don't make me angry.
Well, they changed the Hulk's color from gray to green to tie him into Frankenstein's monster even more explicitly.
Well, and one of the things that I thought was kind of stupid, even though it had something to do with the copyright, was the fact that the bolts that were on Frankenstein the monster, because they were under universal copyright, no other film could ever use it up until the film came into public domain.
Wow, really?
Correct. Which is why Hammer had to find a different way of creating their own Frankenstein.
Well, but the 31 film isn't not in public domain yet.
But the bolts of Frankenstein have been used in other films, so how?
Yes, they have.
Yeah, it's possible their copyright on that ran out and then wasn't renewed, but the film itself might not have gone into that yet.
They might have just paid a fee to use them, you know.
Yeah, or maybe they stopped enforcing that part of it. Or something.
I know some versions of the monster have the bolts on the temples instead of the neck, which I don't know.
I'd put them on the nipples personally.
Well, I know with Hotel Transylvania, I believe that version of him does have the bolts, but his skin is not green. So I think it's one of those things where if it's just different enough, then they can get away with it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well,
What's the
because
production company on that?
that's Universal is who made this film, and then Total Transylvania
Right.
is Sony.
Sony.
Right.
But it's the same thing with Disney and Oz the Great and Powerful. They could only suggest or evoke the 1939 Wizard of Oz, which is made by MGM, but Warner Brothers has the rights now. So they had to get just close enough, but not too close to actually technically fall into copyright infringement. It's very, very technical.
I just remember it being like a huge, big thing when it came to the Hammer Hammer people making the Frankenstein monster. They almost got in trouble for almost using the bolts, if I remember correctly. And
it's fair enough too. I mean, it's such an iconic thing that I can see being like, all right, that's ours.
Well, Universal is very particular about their particular monster iconography.
Protective.
Yes, and there are certain things like so Dracula and Frankenstein as novels, those are in the public domain. Anybody can adapt them. Anybody can do anything. The specific look of Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff, those are copywritten, and they are very heavily protected by Universal. So if one wants to reference them, they have to be very particular with what elements they do or don't carry over. Or in the case of, like, say, the Count from Sesame Street, that's clearly like a parody. So that when something's a parody, you can get away with a lot more. But point being that they definitely care about their monster legacy even to this day.
I mean, nipple bolts aside, I think were I to do it under like such constrictions, I probably would have just made like exposed bits of his skull, kind of like Chop Top and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like on either side, and then just have it where there's like plugs, or that they just like basically put them in a thing where electrodes touch the exposed skull plates.
Well, what about
you could give them you give them like a little cap and made out of metal, be like.
I do like how they use the bolts in Frankenhooker, yeah. Or he's just constantly. It really always got to me whenever they would do the twisting of it occasionally.
See, dude, Frankenhooker wouldn't have turned down the monster. She'd just been like, "You want a date?
Got money?"
Well, the important thing to state about the way that the monster looks in the novel, not like they got the basics down here as far as like the monster is huge, very physically imposing being. They got that down.
Obviously a very strong individual.
Yes, and stitched together from dead bodies. They got that part. Mm-hmm. The monster's hair was kind of long in the novel, and his skin was yellowish, very corpse-like, kind of black lips, that sort of stuff. He looked like he was preserved, so he didn't have that short haircut that the monster had here, nor was his head flat. The part of the point of making the monster large was just that Victor would have easy access to everything. Because obviously there was no such thing as like microsurgery back then or anything like that.
Not that I'm making any kind of a racial slur here, but could the monster have in fact been Asian?
Well, they never say anything like that.
You said that his skin was yellowish, and
it's like yellowish, like either like a corpse or like one that was preserved, like almost like formaldehyde.
Yeah, and Penny Dreadful, he looks like all jaundicey, and it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, so like that's that. When I say yellow, I mean like actually yellow, like what you might see in a jar somewhere.
Actually, I do like it. I strongly remember the description that they actually give in Young Frankenstein as to why he had to be oversized. It's like, as the minuteness of the parts formed a great hindrance to my speed, I resolved therefore to make a being of gigantic stature. And then, of course, we get Inga's
Yeah.
In other words, his veins, his feet, his hands, his organs would all have to be increased in size. He would have an
He-
enormous Schwanztucker.
that goes without saying. He's going to be very popular.
Oof.
and it's not Igor, it's Igor.
Igor.
They told me it was Igor. Well, they were wrong then, weren't they? But,
He could have fixed that hump on Fritz's back.
yeah,
Maybe we'll cover that one next Halloween.
we
That'll
should,
be
but
good.
no, the whole that was a great touch in Young Frankenstein because that reason is lifted right from the book. The idea was it gave Victor easy access to all the organs, all the veins, all the everything. And
Tammy.
because he was doing it all by himself, he had no hunchback assistant or anything, and he was doing it when he was in this kind of delirium fever state because he was working on the monster day and night, not eating, not sleeping, not
Just fucking
anything.
huffing formaldehyde, getting all looped
Pro-
out.
Probably.
Probably, yeah. They never say that, but I wouldn't put it past him.
Tammy, did you read Frankenstein at any given point in time in your life?
Yeah, I said that I read it. I just haven't read it in a long time. That's how come. I know that it's not, that this version is not follow the book that well, you know, but it doesn't mean that it's not a good version.
Yeah, it was based on a play adaptation, which I was pleased to see that the play adaptation was also brought to the stage by a woman, and it was written by a woman. So it's like, well, that's kind of nice, especially given that that happened in periods where that was not especially common in 1818 or in the early 1900s. Which, and again, I always thought that was a great touch because like so it's two male characters at odds with each other, but it's the insights into the human condition are not dependent on that in any way, but it's just more interesting that some of those great insights into the opposite sex can come from when the author is the opposite of the protagonist that they're writing about. Kind of like, a lot of the L. Frank Baum was a man, but his protagonist is Dorothy Gale. Lewis Carroll's a man, but his protagonist is Alice. Thing here, you can find some interesting insights, kind of going from the outside in, but also her grasp of language was so strong and so impressive even to this day, that it's just great to see that a woman brought it to the stage, to translate that vision. And I think the screenwriters were not women, but it's I just think that's a very good insight. And then meanwhile, James Whale himself, he brought a very what we would now call a very cinematic touch to what could have been like Dracula, which was very interior, very obviously from the stage in it originally. But no, he brought it outside. He had bigger sets. He had more ambitious camera motions. He had more spectacle with the burning windmill and all that stuff. And like I was saying in the chat, a lot of people have interpreted his version of the Frankenstein story as a metaphor for being gay because he himself was gay, and he had Henry Frankenstein had the whole bit about you dream of what the stars and of all these things, and then people call you crazy, and people have definitely interpreted that in a very particular and personal way.
So I just wanted to speak as to the character of Igor. So in Ghost of Frankenstein, there was a character played by Bela Lugosi that was named Igor, spelled with a Y, G-O-R.
He actually debuted. He was in Son of Frankenstein before that.
But no, that was actually. Oh yeah, that's right. In Son of Frankenstein as well. But he was neither a hunchback nor a lab assistant at all. So, but apparently the name Igor came up in Mystery of the Wax Museum as Ivan Igor in the 1933 adaptation, and then when it was remade as House of Wax, Igor was given to the henchman of the curator, who was played by young Charles Bronson. So that is where we get Igor. So just thought that was
strangely enough, Bela Lugosi's hair in Son of Frankenstein is kind of reminiscent of Charles Bronson's hair, like all through the 80s, you know. So I never thought about that.
I just think it's an interesting history thing, since Igor always seems to have gone hand in hand with Frankenstein, and yet he had nothing to do, not even with the original book, you know. So
I think it's one of those things with stuff like this where over the years various tidbits merge into one thing, you know what I mean?
Kind of like how people get Jason and Leatherface conflated.
You'll see the depictions where it's like the hockey mask with the chainsaw.
Yeah.
It's stupid, you know. It's just public ignorance over time, but you know, but it is. I never cared for Igor as a concept, but it's also, again, it's so iconic that it's like, well, it doesn't really matter at this point.
I did enjoy Igor character in Van Helsing for some reason.
If you're like a mad scientist, you have to have a freaky sidekick. Like, I just love it. You know, even with like, what's his ass? Marlon Brando in Island of Dr. Moreau with his little tiny sidekick who dresses like him. I mean,
I was going to say Riff Raff, Dr. Frankenfurter and Riff Raff.
Yeah. Well, the Rocky Horror Picture Show and the Rocky Horror Show on the stage, which came first. But that's its own really fascinating, weirdo, fun, amazing
entity.
It's its
a masterpiece.
Well, but it wouldn't exist without Frankenstein.
No, of course not.
But it kind of has gone beyond that and become its own thing. But it's amazing for what it is.
Yeah, I'd say it like even went further, because Spaceballs is enough Star Wars that it's always going to be thought of in the same breath. Whereas Rocky Horror does enough of its own shit that I think it, you know, obviously, like you said, became its own sort of separate entity, even though it draws a lot.
Well, and it's not just Frankenstein that it pays homage to.
Yeah.
Because it pays homage to B movies in general, science fiction, vampires, you know. It's all great stuff.
And Spaceballs 2 is also Wizard of Oz and Star Trek, as well as Star Wars. Most people think Star Wars, but they're in there as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, insofar that Star Wars takes after the Wizard of Oz, which it does.
See, what we're really glossing over here is that the fucking Baron is the main event of the show here. That guy knows how to party.
Oh, yeah.
Pulls off that fez and that needlessly elaborate smoking pipe. He's got a weird lump on his neck that I never noticed until this time somehow.
You're speaking to the Von Baron Frankenstein?
Yeah, his dad.
Yeah.
I love that.
Film should have been up for costume design just for that alone. Not to mention, this should have been up from. They should have had makeup back then.
And I love how Henry is brought some wine by all that bevy of females, and he's the one who takes the drink from it.
Yeah. He's just like, he doesn't need it. I love how, too, when you really think about it, the Baron he sets up the perfect storm for the whole thing, because he gets all the villagers liquored up like a son of a bitch before they storm out with their pitchclorks and torches and stuff.
Actually, it was only the torches. I was surprised that
some of the people torches. Had clubs.
None of them had clubs. It was all torches.
No, they got clubs in this first one. It's in the second one where they bring out the rakes and the pitchforks.
Clubs.
They had clubs in this too. I saw it too.
I didn't see any clubs. I just saw the torches, and then
they look just like the torches. So you could be forgiven for thinking that they're just unlit torches, you know, which they could have been, you know.
Yeah.
Well, we don't make Dave head of security, right?
No. Well, point being that they've got what they need.
I just let them have at the monster, banga till death, or kanga till death, or whatever, you know.
Well, that's kind of what they're going for. They're just going to, you know, whatever they got to do, torch him or whatever. But I mean, go ahead.
Does anyone else, though? This is one of the things that I think I've always had with this movie. Does anyone else feel that the extreme suddenness, where they go from discovering the little girl has drowned to targeting specifically this monster that theoretically no one knew about, it seems to happen really fast.
Well, I watched for that too this time around because I always thought the same thing. But again, like I said earlier, they don't know that there's a monster specifically. They just know that there's a murder afoot and they're going to find him.
Actually,
I would assume
there was someone who came to the Frankenstein house and said that the monster had escaped.
Yeah, it was his buddy.
So
it's
not
terrorizing the country.
It's not that far fetched to think that someone of the servants actually ran to the center of town and was like, "Monster escaped," while all this partying and dancing was going on.
Well, but I would assume that in this small town, this small village, I would assume that that's something very out of the way, very abnormal, for someone to be killed, let alone a child.
And if you notice, there were two sides of town. There were the Frankenstein people, and then there were the Burgermeister's people.
Yeah.
So,
and I think in the book, Victor was his family was pretty well off, but I don't think they specifically had the title of Baron, if I recall. But again, they weren't German by nature; they were from Geneva initially. But yeah, so
I'm glad they changed it, man, because we just need a whole montage cut of the party scenes with that song from Return of the Living Dead playing over it.
Well, and the other thing is that again, there is a Germanic tie to the whole thing because of the University of Ingolstadt, but here they tie it into Germany a lot more. But then also it looks like it's set in what was then modern times, 1931, albeit rural, because they still are wearing very traditional garb and everything.
When they first came into that courtyard with the party scene, I swear, or at least with the general town that's connected to it, I very could hear in the background Belle singing, "There's a time in a perfect world."
Yeah, little town. It's a quiet.
For some reason, because that.
That story's in France, but neighbors.
Right.
I know. I
kept
thinking I could see Belle walking down on that, singing to the townsfolk or some shit.
And also, this is just one of those ones where I hear the line from talking about any given townsperson. I can't help but think of the line from Futurama. Pardon me, my good simpleton.
Yeah. Well, and,
I choose to believe.
And honestly, when they go and when they go in that line with the torches and all that stuff, then I was kind of singing to myself, "Kill the beast."
Yeah. Well, I have no doubt that was partially influenced by these movies,
Yeah, I mean, rural Germany, rural France, even at that time, would not have advanced overly much, I mean, that's kind of a cliche in a lot of those World War II movies when they go through rural France or rural Germany, and the lower class people, they just haven't advanced all that much, And
also, I was reading that apparently James Whale at one point went on record as saying that he was aware that it was hard to pinpoint when the film took place, but that was partially intentional to give it more of a, you could almost say, sort of a mythic or fairy tale-ish quality.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a fun point, definitely.
They nail it down a little bit more in Bride, because when Pretorius is grave robbing with the Birkin hair dudes, they're saying that the girl died in 1899, I think they say. And he's all right, perfect, this is the one right here,
which is still kind of bullshit, because their suits are totally contemporary for 1931, And then also Bride of Frankenstein. Like a lot of people have said, oh, it's a better movie than the first one, which in a lot of ways it is. But then in other ways, like I'm like the prologue with Mary Shelley herself, and she's in the correct period garb of early 1800s, and she's telling this story that is clearly set in the future, in the way distant future than what she could have foreseen. And then
Right.
meanwhile the actual book is set in the late 1700s, so it would have been
It
in
is
the
pretty
Regan.
awesome prologue though, with old Lord Byron rolling the shit out of those R's. I love it.
Yeah, well, but I'm just that always bugged me.
Rightful graves.
But that always bugged me because I'm like, she was writing about what for her was the relatively recent past. And then so what? She's supposed to have written about something over 100 years in the future. Are you shitting me?
Well, we talked about her being a sci-fi writer, so there you
Well,
go.
and again, Mary Shelley, one of the best authors in the English language, I think, and being that she was the mother of science fiction as we know it, so, and of Gothic horror as we know it. So, I mean, kind of a significant figure in so many ways, but yeah, particularly with science fiction.
What do we think about Frankenstein's affianced?
Elizabeth.
Oh, Elizabeth. Yeah, she is just kind of your standard nice girl.
Henry,
and
Placeholder.
she was a very nice girl in the book as well. Not really all that developed, but also not anything bad about her either. Like she was just a good person that I think anybody would have been very lucky to be.
Who was concerned about Henry's well-being.
Exactly.
Yeah, she was a piece. I always noticed too in these older movies that they've always got like the friend of the husband who kind of neglects the wife, and you can tell he's like totally moving in for the score on the side. I can't blame them. They kind of develop her a little bit more in Bride because they hint at this idea that she might be somewhat clairvoyant, but they don't do anything with it because no one really gives a shit.
Yeah. Well,
you want to see the monster.
It's a lot more tragic in the book because there's the famous line that the monster has, which is that, when the monster tries to get him to make a bride for him, and then Henry destroys her before even creating her, and that makes him absolutely heartbroken. He's like, you aren't here, you ruined my chances of happiness, and I'll be there on yours, on your wedding night. And he shows up on their wedding and he murders Elizabeth.
He's more of a creeper in this version. He's like,
he's got that wow.
That look he gives her.
I love that. That was funny.
There was something kind of cool where the Baron actually had like this a wreath of orange blossoms that he was going to give the bride and groom, and then I guess two grooms had like wreaths of the orange blossoms to wear or some shit. It was weird.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It is pretty sweet how he crashes the wedding, but at the same time, it's like it sounds like it makes a lot more sense in the book, whereas in this, it's just he's kind of wandering around and happens to end up there.
Yeah,
I like how he locks her in there, though. Like,
that
she basically gets attacked because sexism. He's just, I'm just gonna lock her in here like a child or something weird.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is, again, a product of its times in that I've seen the character Elizabeth plays a dozen, 100 times. I mean, she really isn't all that distinctive a character. And one could argue the same with Victor. He's kind of, I think, Mo, you were the one that pointed that out, that it's not an uncommon role to see at the time. The the monster, of course, is memorable, and the Baron is memorable, and Henry arguably, but Yeah, Victor and especially Elizabeth are just kind of there.
Yeah, Victor's more a means to an end, very much like the dude in The Fly. Like, you don't really give a shit about that guy until he's turned into The Fly, you know? Then that's where it gets, like, he gets interesting, I suppose.
Well, you weren't into Seth Brundle before he turns into the Fly. If we're talking about the remake,
if we're talking Goldblum, then yeah, I'm always into some Goldblum. He shows copious chest hair in that movie. So
he's. I admit, I agree with you when you're talking about Andre from the original, because he's.
Yeah, that's what I was referencing.
Because Andre is just
he's just a bit of a boob, you know,
generic handsome scientist. Because there's a whole lot of those running around, you know, and he. But yeah, he's not as interesting as Seth Brundle.
I mean, the doctor, like I always forget the old doctor's name in this one because Pretorius is just so much more interesting in the second movie. But yeah, he's just kind of also sort of there, I guess.
Yeah, well, he's basically
voice of Coffin. You know,
he's playing like discount Abraham Van Helsing because Edward Van Sloan, he played him in Dracula, and he played the same character basically in The Mummy as well.
It feels like he's in there just because they wanted him in there more so than that he's
more that he was contracted than that he really wanted to be there. Probably.
Yeah, exactly.
But still, it did give off that presence of you shouldn't be messing with this. It's evil what you're doing, you know, that kind of thing.
You have created a monster that will destroy you. That whole thing.
Well, and like, you know, his Jody or whatever, the guy that's really like keeping Mrs. Frankenstein happy while Victor's up in his friggin' dungeon working on like zombie men. That guy's pretty much invisible too. He's just there for a couple of scenes, you know.
Well, Henry Clerval in the book had a lot more personality, and he also never horned in on Elizabeth because Elizabeth was way far away from where Victor was doing his experiments. But yeah, Henry Clerval had a lot more personality in the book.
I can imagine. I don't know, man. And I mean, you know, we got to talk about Boris Karloff's performance in general. I mean,
I think his performance of the monster is very human.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
And you almost feel sorry for him as a monster because they're screaming before he even does anything. You know, he's just walking towards them or some shit. And Fritz, he's like trying to stick at him with the pliers, and he's whipping him to death. So it's like more or less, Fritz deserved his death.
Yeah, I always sympathize with the monster in every interpretation.
Yeah, I'm just rooting for him to yeet motherfuckers off of things. And
I usually sympathize with him too.
And it's kind of funny how his first victim was a monster that he killed.
Yeah, well, you know, something else that kind of stuck with me this viewing that I never really thought of before, which again, this was not in the book at all. But the idea of the normal brain versus the abnormal brain, all that kind of stuff.
That was a weird thing they added.
Well, that wasn't in the book whatsoever.
Something
normal.
But what I thought was kind of interesting, because again, I think that there are other dimensions to this particular take on the story. Like I mentioned with James Whale being gay and that kind of stuff. There are other interpretations of this. I kind of thought about, you know, maybe you could interpret this as having been ahead of its time in terms of, because that was a very common school of thought at the time, that criminality or juvenile delinquency or whatever was due to a brain abnormality or something like that.
Same thing with homosexuality, you know. Yeah, they try to convert you or pray the gay away and different things like that.
That's what I mean. But like, it's the point is, like, any kind of abnormal behavior at that time was always chalked up to something genetic or something morphological or whatever. And so what I'm saying is, maybe in its own weird way, this is you could argue it either way. Is it confirming that stereotype, or is it going against it? Because really, the monster doesn't do anything violent or monstrous unless provoked, which anybody would do, especially when they're first
Hey,
learning about
hey,
things.
Jake, Brandon, this is almost
Mhm.
pre-Psychopaths.
He killed a little
Yeah,
girl. He
a
killed a
little
little
bit.
girl. I think it might have been an accident, but he did kill a little girl, and there was no provocation there.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
like
Well, he
accidental.
was
Him
trying to play
attacking.
with her and
Yeah,
Yeah, that
I
was
ended
think
up.
he thought she was gonna float like the flower.
Yeah, that was clearly an accident. So I don't,
Yeah.
I don't think that fits my hypothesis in any way. But my point is, like, I almost was like, is this making the statement that it's more about nurture rather than nature? Because you could easily read it that way.
They do sort of. I mean, like when he attacks Henry's lady or whatever, I forget her name. That's kind of unprovoked,
Yeah, well, by that point
He
in the
was
story,
creeping on
yeah,
her by that point. Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
And in the second movie,
that's
they
Yeah.
not.
do away with it altogether. He's chucking dudes off
Well,
castles and shit.
Yeah, well,
one of the
that's what I
things.
mean. And like even the monster in the book, like he does reach a point where he goes past the point of no return, as does Victor too. They both get to the same place. But
Well,
point is, like, there is still plenty of time for both of them to avert course, but circumstances prevailed to where they didn't. But I
I
think
can
you
see,
could
I think,
use,
what you're saying, though.
yeah,
Like, he does go beyond. I think it sort of subverts the stereotype because he is a gentle soul. There's nothing really wrong with him. In the second one, even though he does get some sweet kills, I think those are more for cinematic effect. Like, by and large, for most of the movie, he's friendly in the second one as well. He even makes a sweet friend. I think the gay subtext is there, even if it's not intentional, because this, especially in the second one, it's definitely got a more flamboyant quality to it. There's more humor in it. I mean, and then you could, like, I think you said in chat that it definitely has influenced, LGBT culture and on some level, and I could see that with Bride, especially like drag queen culture.
yeah. Well, and Rocky Horror Picture Show,
Yeah,
very
Yep.
clearly, and Gods and Monsters, which was about James Whale himself and about his life and his own journeys with his
Right.
sexuality, juxtaposed with his interpretation of the monster and all that stuff. So I mean, it definitely has a tie because, well, the great joy of Mary Shelley as an author is that she has such a beauty and a sensitivity in her writing, and the monster and Victor both have always appealed to those of us who have felt misunderstood or disenfranchised in some way, and that can apply to a whole lot of different types of people.
indeed.
And keep in mind that scene with the him leering basically at the woman. There was a lot of disagreement as to whether to put that scene in. Matter of fact, I believe that, gosh, what's his name? The guy who played Frankenstein, which I should know the name.
Boris Karloff.
Boris Karloff, yeah, had even disagreed with that, saying that it would ruin, and a couple of the others, people disagreed with the director, saying it would ruin the likability, the not likability, what's the word? The sympathy
Yeah.
for him. And so they didn't want it to go in because, again, but the idea is that when children saw this, they automatically felt an attraction to the monster, even though the monster was a child killer. So it kind of
Yeah.
was funny in that way.
Well, and
Yeah.
but it makes sense in the context of the story because the monster, even though he does bad things by that point, he's still very much a newborn and without a lot of self-awareness and that kind of stuff. So he sees a pretty girl, he's gonna, do a very kind of primal almost mating call, if you want to think of it that way. A primal reaction, and that's again very common with all kinds of mammals
He's
that made
just an
total
undead
sense to me.
incel looking for love,
Actually, if you take the when we talk about the monsters, you just take where he smirks, pause it, and then overlay Herman Munster going ring a ding ding.
Yeah.
Tammy, were you going to say something?
I was gonna say that I felt sorry for the monster from the beginning because he didn't seem like he was mean or anything like that until Fritz started antagonizing him with
Yeah.
fire and then the whipping him and everything. He scared him. He made him feel like he had to protect himself. And he brought, by him doing that, he brought out the anger in him. Otherwise, if he would not have done that, I don't think, you know, he would have turned mean. You know, it's just that I felt sorry for him right then, you know, right at the beginning, because that just, it's like, why don't you just leave him alone, you know? Because Henry was talking with him, and and the doctor, and everything was going fine until Fritz showed up with that fire, you know, and that's when you saw him get out of hand because he was afraid.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I was saying is I think it's a lot more nurture versus nature that he's sort of pushed into becoming more monstrous in his behavior rather than that necessarily being his basic nature. And they make that abundantly clear in the book that he is a really beautiful soul, a wise soul, a deep thinking soul who gets increasingly pushed into darker and darker territory because of society.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like, once he's pushed over that edge, it takes him a bit to get him back on course to that sort of characteristic. Like in Bride at the beginning, he's pretty goddamn aggressive. He does save a lady from drowning, but then he's also bursting out of the woods, scaring gypsies and stealing their ham like fucking Yogi Bear or something.
Yeah.
We do have
Big
to,
makeup basket.
we do have to touch on the windmill scene, though.
Oh, well, that's one of the best climaxes in motion picture history, which again
Agreed.
did not occur in the book whatsoever. But if they wanted to go the route of the book, then they would have to chase him all the way up to the Arctic, and there's no way they probably could have done it on a realistic budget of that time, and it wouldn't have made as spectacular of a climax because it is a lot more drawn out in the book. But as a climax go, I mean that's about as iconic as it gets because windmills are cool in general, and it
They
burns
really are.
down. It burns down, but then it's got arguably the best sequence of shots in the film, which is Henry and the monster, they look at each other
Oh, they're looking
through
at each other. Yeah,
through the
that's good
spinning windmill, and it's very much like two sides of the same coin. And I think that that's a pretty readily understandable thing that Henry slash Victor and the monster, they tend to have more in common than either one of them would like to admit. And you actually do see a theme of in both the book and in this film.
And I feel like
You see a theme of fathers and sons.
I feel
Because
like there's a hell of a lot more anger towards the father in this one than there
Well-
was in the book.
yes,
no,
there is.
that actual, I don't know, the scene, you can see there's a conflict in it when he's dragging him with to the windmill. It's not necessarily full on hate, but there's just that confusion of, what am I supposed to be, and you're the one with the answers.
Yeah, which I mean the monster and Victor in the book, they have quite a few showdowns and arguments and confrontations, and the monster is able to verbalize all those feelings, and this is kind of like the more silent, more heavily truncated version of it, but the sentiment is definitely there. But yeah, the theme of fathers and sons is there with Henry and with the monster, but then also with Henry and his father, which you never quite got that same dynamic necessarily in the book, although Victor's mother died, and that was what gave him the desire to find the secret of bestowing life. So that is a missing element here, but I like the fathers and sons theme there because in so many other adaptations, the monster is given the name Adam, and he's given his father's surname, so he'd be Adam
Lame.
Frankenstein.
Lame.
Well, no, that's-
I
get it. I
I
get
do
it.
want
but-
to. I do want to mention that in Dark Shadows, the television show, the soap opera, they do instigate the idea of Frankenstein, and they do call the Frankenstein monster in there Adam.
Yes.
And I know that the actor who played him died not too long ago, but I just thought that it was interesting to mention that it was influenced in Dark Shadows as well.
Yeah. Well, the Adam thing that also came from the book as well. Like he's never explicitly referred to as Adam, but the monster sees himself as Adam from the Bible, and he quotes Paradise Lost, and that he's meant to be thematically connected there, so it does have a basis.
See, in Penny Dreadful, they kind of continue that theme, I guess, and that the monster, or well, this I don't want to spoil the whole thing, but one of the creatures calls himself Proteus, like he picks the name in that book, and I think that means like first man or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's a whole thing. I've never read the book myself, but you mentioned how in the book, Victor's mom had died, so that's what got him obsessed with conquering death type thing. I do like how in the movie here, Henry has that whole speech where he's talking about like just basically discovering the truth behind the unknowns in the world. He talks about like figuring out what makes the light cancel out the darkness or different things like that. So it kind of implies that he was just trying to figure out some unknown shit. It just so happened that making a person out of corpses was the thing that he just happened to land on.
Yeah, well, and that there's a direct parallel with that in the book, because both he and Elizabeth have a passion for life, and Henry and Victor particularly, he has a passion for discovering the secrets of the universe and of the wonders of science, and trying to unlock the mysteries of life and death and all that stuff, and he does it for seemingly very good reasons. I don't like interpretations where they make Victor into like a sadistic character or a monster himself.
Yeah.
I know why they do, because they want to say, well, who's the real monster? They want to say that. But like
trope.
So deep.
Well, but but that's my point. Is like everybody's done that, and it misses the point of who Victor is. Victor is a good person who gets carried away and creates something that ultimately undoes him. And that's to me that's a lot more tragic.
And I did want
I gotta admit though, that way when he threw him off of that windmill and he hits one of the blades and falls down, that is brutal as heck.
It is.
Every time it happens, I just have to say "fuck you." Like it's
no. Even
that son of a bitch.
It's obviously a dummy, but yeah, for the time, that would have been pretty brutal stuff.
I did want to touch on the fact that it has inspired. This film has inspired you in one of your short films, correct?
It sure did. Well, more specifically, the novel did. But I mean, again, I'd be lying if I said that because this film pervades every person on Earth, pretty much. But yes, my film Eternus that I made as my college final project was directly inspired by the story of Frankenstein, and was inspired by German Expressionism as well. But it's just the idea of like what I really focused on was Victor's own passion of what if we could finally hold on to something and life couldn't just take it away from us, like in the form of death or disease or decay or things like that. So I understood Victor's feeling in life, and so I wanted to put that into a film, and it spoke to where I was at the time in my life and that kind of stuff. So, and as much as I liked that play with Benedict Cumberbatch that we mentioned before, it does portray Victor as a lot more like negligent or narcissistic or whatever, and you can do that if you want, but I think that kind of misses the point of the character, at least to me. But I was glad with this film that you still, again, it was more heavily truncated because it's a short movie, but you still got the sense of this person who has a genuine passion for discovery and for science and for trying to the wonderment factor that does inevitably carry him away. And Victor in the book does go through a period of delirium and fever and not being in good health and everything, which this does cover. So that they definitely got that part down.
Another thing, like major film that we would be, it would be unfortunate if it didn't get mentioned, is Reanimator.
Yeah.
Obviously heavily influenced by Frankenstein. And then another movie that basically lifts an entire scene from this movie is Return of the Living Dead, where they have that yellow jaundicey corpse in the meat locker or whatever, and they let it out, and then they put the pickaxe in its head. It's a lot funnier in Return of the Living Dead.
I would also say that Frankenweenie was also inspired by Frankenstein.
Oh yeah,
but the thing is, it was originally a short film, and he also did a short film called Victor. So he was heavily influenced by Frankenstein.
It's Vincent. Yeah. Well, but then if you're talking about that, Edward Scissorhands is directly influenced by Frankenstein.
Yeah.
But
even Catwoman is influenced. His Catwoman is influenced by Frankenstein.
Yeah, definitely. But I'm telling you that this story has influenced so many people throughout the centuries, and for good reason, because it's a tragic. I think it's a tragic and beautiful story, even more than a horrific one. It definitely was horrific for its time, but I think the tragedy, the wonderment, the beauty of it, the macabreness of it, I think that really is what pervades and lasts throughout the years.
Well, and as we know in like horror and the independent industry, it's influenced. Film titles come out like Frankenhooker and Frankenpimp and Frankenthug and.
Well, it's because it's public domain, so anyone can do it. But
Flesh for Frankenstein.
Yeah, well, but because it's public domain, then you get some of those really, really great ones. Again, like Edward Scissorhands wouldn't exist without it, and a lot of these really great ones. But I think it is a beautiful story, and it's a story that does touch people on a very deep level. I think. You can go full blown horror with it, and many have, and that's definitely a big piece of it. I think it's that plus it's everything else that goes along with it. But you did mention Return of the Living Dead. One of the things that they got right, which was also from the novel, as opposed to other zombie things, is that the zombies in Return of the Living Dead. Even though that was more of a comedy, at least the first one was, they could verbalize what they were going through. They could speak.
Send more paramedics.
Yeah, and that was great because again, the monster in the book could verbalize, and even in Bride of Frankenstein, he does learn language just a little bit more.
Yeah, he gets a pretty good grasp of it.
Yeah, but I think that that's again an important dimension that I'm glad that even though it's not a direct adaptation, it's influenced by. But I was glad that they got back to that in a way that other zombie films didn't really do, and they kind of still haven't done in a lot of ways, with a few exceptions. But
well, they taught Bub how to work a Walkman and shoot, and he spoke in Day of the Dead.
Yeah.
It's definitely been a thing. And Fido, I guess. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that movie. It's amazing.
Oh yeah, I love Fido.
The zombies in that are a little bit smarter than your average zombies and stuff. So they've delved into it. I think with zombie territory and general undead stuff, they are undead.
Yeah.
So, to make them too smart, it dives into hokey territory, and that's why I don't like Land of the Dead. I mean, I just can't do that one as far as I'm concerned. They dead end at Day of the Dead because I can't.
I don't know why, but don't you ever look at Fido and think this could be a sequel to Shaun of the Dead?
Yes,
because I swear the ending of Shaun of the Dead looks like it would lead directly into what Fido was about.
Exactly, he's playing PlayStation with them and stuff. So Shaun of the Dead, that's another, friggin' his dude is playing PS2 with him at the end of it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, but that is an important, which actually The Fly, even The Fly has a little bit of, it owes something to Frankenstein in terms of like science fiction and
mad
science and
scientist
all that.
movies in general since then have all been, I think, influenced or just directly ape Frankenstein.
Yeah. Well, but
I think it's one of those things, like these early Universal monster movies especially just became part of horror DNA.
Yeah.
So it's the type of shit where even subconsciously you're probably going to rip something off from one of them if you make a horror film. If you grew up in that era, or the eras rather, where they were a prominent part of your horror viewing. Interestingly enough, I think the current modern era is like the only era so far where they haven't been like a standard part of people's horror viewing. You talk to kids that were born in like 2098 in there.
Yeah.
It's most of them haven't seen the shit,
Well, it's really depressing because then they grow up with like slasher movies and stuff, which they have their place, but it's you're missing out on a lot more of the foundational aspects that you need to have if you can really call yourself a horror fan.
I think that, I mean, the 80s and the 90s were the true renaissance of resurgent horror. And it is sad when when you've never lived through those 2 decades or one of the other. There's something you miss there, because there's a lot of homage to the classics that are out of there. That's one of the reasons why I like that In Search of Darkness trilogy. Of course, I haven't seen the 3rd film, but that's coming. So, and they're doing it as a trilogy as well, because you know how things are. But a definitive examination of it, you look back, it's just, that is it. That's like definitive.
Well, and you could argue that Freddy and Jason, and I mean, I don't even know that you have to argue it. It's just kind of commonly accepted that Freddy, Jason, Michael, the Leprechaun, Pinhead, those are all like the Universal monsters of our generation, But we grew up in those decades where you were still constantly seeing these old ones,
Yeah,
a lot of these kids now just haven't fucked with them, and that's understandable because they don't have the presence that they used to outside of like us older horror fans. But on the other hand, you've got stuff like just infinitely available media nowadays for the most part. That means that they'll probably get into them eventually,
Well, they'd better, otherwise they shouldn't call themselves horror fans, because people that their education starts and more or less stops with anything from 1980 onward. It's like, well, that's not, you can't call yourself legit at that point, because if you want to be really
I hesitate
legit,
to throw a time period on it like that.
Well, the kind of person I'm talking about, though. They only think cinema started in the 80s, and it's like, no, you got to go back to.
I run into it constantly in horror groups, man.
You gotta go back to the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the good stuff. That's where it all started.
Well, and like I said at the beginning of this, there was that time period where I didn't shun them, but I definitely neglected the Universal monster shit during like my edgy sort of splatter kid phase, where I was like, oh, unless it's got like guts and offensive shit in it, I don't care, So I would watch them if they were like on TV, but I wasn't really like spending time with them like I did when I was a kid. And then I came back around to it later and developed a new appreciation for them, because you could see the influence in so much of that stuff. Jason Lives is the only example that we've talked about together that I can think of offhand. But I mean, even that has tons of Universal monsters flavor to it. It's got a whole like 80s gothic horror thing going on with it.
And that was my favorite of the Friday the 13th by far, because the director of that one explicitly said that he shot it in such a way that if you were to desaturate the footage and make it in black and white, that it would still look good and would feel like an old monster.
And it does.
And shameless plug, my channel SeptumSin versus the World goes over all of the Friday the 13th movies in detail. painfully in some aspects.
It was long and we didn't coordinate it as well as we probably should have, but it was still fun. I think I went a little harder on 3 than I normally would, but every time I watch that movie, I like it less anymore.
Well,
It's just
if I might do a shameless plug too, so my channel Dangerous Arts, DANEJUROUS, Dangerous Arts. I've been doing a month-long Oztober, so I've been doing a lot of Oz adaptations all month long. But 2 that I'm gonna do at some point, I'm gonna do a month-long into Dracula adaptations and a month-long dive into Frankenstein adaptations. Because again,
Awesome.
public domain properties, anybody can do them. So, see how other people have done them and hopefully get inspired. But those are definitely on the way. I don't know when because Alice in Wonderland is next, but they're definitely in my mindset though because I love both of those books to death.
I'd honestly put that like Judy Garland Wizard of Oz right there with Universal movies of being like the shit that kind of started like these visually spectacular like movies with elaborate sets and all the shit that we love from horror and weird movies in general. Wizard of Oz really is the origin of that for a lot of us, and shit like Babes in Toyland and Darby O'Gill and the Little People, like all those old movies like that, I think go hand in hand with Universal monster shit.
Well, this Frankenstein, Dracula, Snow White, King Kong, those are all 30s films that have become so embedded in the DNA of not just American cinema, but world cinema and just culture in general that they've become totally inseparable in our collective minds.
And let's not.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, let's not forget the production value of this. Even today, looking at this on a 4K TV, I was surprised at how well a 1931 film cleans up on that screen.
Oh,
and
dude, yeah.
The makeup, the sets. I talked a little bit about like the guy who engineered the machinery, which was reused a lot in sci-fi and some horror later on. But that one, that particular set design, everything was spectacular. I mean, the costume, the makeup for Frankenstein's monster itself was amazing. Even to this day, that's a feat.
Yeah, it pops, man. The movie's crisp as fuck, and it's again, like I said earlier, there's something about the frame rate of it. Again, I don't know too much about the science of the actual cameras. Shame on me. I know it's like 24 frames per second is standard cinematic.
Yeah,
like frame rate, right? But I feel like this had to have been shot in something else because it's just so much more fluid looking than a lot of movies you watch. Like it feels like you're watching like live footage or documentary footage.
Yeah,
at
well,
definitely
the Jack Pierce makeup was revolutionary as well. I mean, that was long before there ever was a Best Makeup award, but his makeup was pioneering. And again, the makeup on the monster was so horrific that, and they really draw it out in the best way because he backs into the door, his back to camera, and
I'm glad
turns
we
around
got on
slowly.
that, dude. It's iconic, but it's silly as fuck. Who walks into a door backwards, even if you're a reanimated dead dude?
Well,
Yeah, it was crazy.
Great, though. It's great though because audiences had never seen anything like that before, and they really make it special. And he turns around slowly, and then they have the 3 shots right next to each other that kind of punch in on a tight
it's fantastic, but it's.
I think the only way he could walk up those stairs was backwards. So
I don't know, man. I mean, it's just it's a great example of a shot that is amazing for how it plays out in the camera, but actual logic behind it is pretty flawed. Kroll, you were going to say something a moment ago, I think, when we were talking about the fluidity of the movie.
When you talk about the cameras, what they were doing with the pictures, I noticed like a few times the camera shaking. So I think they were actually physically holding the camera at some points, and like the bedroom scene where he's glaring at the bride and coming in, the camera's shaking, and there was a couple other scenes too I noticed as well. So yeah, it is interesting the way they did the movie. It does more feel like a documentary than a feature film. And also, I want to point out one other thing I noticed. The very beginning, instead of saying cast or the actors or whatever, it said players in it, which is what they would say in a play. They said that in the movie, so I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it's always neat when you see that stuff. I think with the cameras, I don't know that you could physically pack the cameras that they were using back in these days, but old James Whale and whoever the DP was, I forget his name, those guys were definitely experimenting with different types of pans and things like that. So it was probably loose, you know what I mean, on the tripod so that they could move the camera. And because of the weight of it, that might account for the shaking, but still kind of the same concept, right? Like they're trying to put the camera more inside the movie than having it just look like a play.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying, like watching it this time, like because I think character wise and a lot of the moments and things like that, I think Dracula with Bela Lugosi, I think that generally it hits more of the beats from the book than this hits the beats from its book. But in terms of a piece of filmmaking, James Whale was really trying to break the mold much more and do things that were more ambitious.
Yes.
Even the Spanish version of Dracula broke the mold more than the English version did.
Oh, yeah, it's better in most areas.
Most ways, yeah. Well, certainly in the cinematography, but what James Whale did here was again much more spectacle. You got much more in the way of like big sets, like with the graveyard scene, which that's one of the best movie graveyards of all time.
Holy shit, is it ever?
I know. And then the windmill itself, as well as even just little things like the dollying to the left when they move into the room in the wedding scene. You go past the doors, and make it into that other room. You wouldn't have seen stuff like that for the most part.
You didn't even for like, at least not super commonly, for probably another couple of decades. This movie feels modern, for lack of a better word, when you look at how it's like shot and put together compared to a lot of other movies from the time, I would say.
Yeah, a lot of movies from the time, they were very stagey because most of their frames of reference were from the stage.
Static angles. If there was pans, it was kind of minimal.
And that really comes in hand in the second Bride of Frankenstein. When you get the entrance of Praetorian with his entrance, they do a dun 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 or some shit like that when they have him enter. That's the very theatrical entrances that they
and they're dollying the fuck out of that camera and Bride, like it's moving all over the place. What were you gonna say, Curl?
I was just saying, like I think. Like when a lot of those films back then, I'd say overacting, like very overacting. In this movie, they were not overacting at all. They did a really good job of just acting. Not overacting it, and I really like that. I really enjoyed that. It definitely does not feel like I watched a 1931 film.
Well, Colin Clive needs a particular shout out as Frankenstein himself, because he brings an intensity to it, and you don't feel entirely safe around him, but you also can understand where he's coming from as well. Like he's not above sympathy or anything like that.
But this was a first.
The looks he would give when he would do his monologues.
This was a
way he would perform them.
This was a first. Evidently, Colin Clive, he had a double by the name of Robert Livingston. I guess he did some of the closing distance shots. For Frankenstein, I thought that was kind of interesting that he had a double.
That is. Yeah. Weird that they'd use him for distance shots, but I guess, whatever. The dude was like a rampant alcoholic. I guess he died at 37, so...
oh wow, he did a great job though. I mean, he does monologues, and he really was. a little bit crazy. Like I love when they call crazy, you call me. We shall see. You know, and it's just like he just
Yeah.
goes
I'm
like
not.
all crazy.
I'm not saying that he wasn't a great Frankenstein whatsoever. I mean, he played.
Oh, he's
spot on. I mean,
fantastic.
Oh yeah.
And I think it's
Yeah.
interesting that Reanimator and shit like that is so influenced by it. And this dude, Jeffrey Combs, has a very Colin Clive vibe about him.
Yeah.
When you look at him and stuff.
I agree.
Well, and tying it into the LGBTQ themes, apparently Colin Clive himself was rumored, at least rumored, if not he actually was at least bisexual. So that also ties into it a little bit more.
Yeah, it's a
I
shame
think-
that it had to be in that era too, because that very well could be something that largely fueled his destructive drinking and lifestyle that led to him dying at 37 years old. I mean, like, that's nuts to me.
Yeah, he more than likely was probably trying to drink it all away, and and a lot of gay men, especially at that time, they married women, and then they would inevitably cheat on them with other men who were doing the same thing.
Dude, that like drug overdoses and drinking problems, especially in later decades, were a lot of closet dudes.
Yeah.
That's how they had to
Yeah,
cope
that was
with
like
their
Doom
fucking
Patrol.
life.
Doom Patrol is that one of the characters of Doom Patrol is gay, and when he was normal, he was a gay guy, and in the Air Force, and which was definitely frowned upon, even more than just being gay, is being in the Air Force. And being gay.
Well, even Clark Gable was rumored to have
Yeah.
Swung both ways. So.
Oh yeah.
Well, and
I
Cary
thought it was
Grant
gay,
did,
but, yeah.
and Rock
Yeah.
Hudson was gay. He
Rock
died.
Hudson was gay, yeah.
Rock Hudson.
And,
Rock Hudson was gay, and he was one of the first to die of AIDS and come out at a time, when it was that he was like on the cusp of that.
That's wild.
Yeah,
there
people
was
couldn't believe it.
I do know there
Go
was a documentary feature that came with mine with the Frankenstein movie. I got the various Universal monster DVDs, which had all the movies for those particular monsters on the sets. And that one had a pretty cool feature documentary. They even described his drinking problem. They described him basically as Jekyll and Hyde. Essentially, because when he would drink, he would be notoriously unstable and mean, but that he was also extremely shy and reserved when he was sober. So it was very
well, and that's what
interesting.
happens, dude, when alcoholism is consuming you to that point. Like, you get wet brain and you start being just a piece of shit a lot of the time. And unfortunately, that's what happens when you drink on that level. It does have a very destructive consequence,
Yeah.
I think we have the same sets, Brandon, the Legacy collections, and I think they're the same as Dave's set. It's just Dave's got like better packaging and whatnot.
Now there's that one that has all of them together, and
there's
then
a Blu-ray remaster or whatever out there. That
I've got.
that only
I've
has
got
the first films.
Well, no, I've got the Blu-rays of all of the Universal monster films. Like I've got all the Frankensteins, all the Wolfmans, all that stuff. They all came in their own legacy sets.
I'll tell you right now. I mean, I think I watched the same one Brandon did on a comparable TV, and they look fucking beautiful, dude. I was surprised too. I was like,
were they in 4K on those sets, Stain?
Well, I'm actually going to get the 4K at some point. I'm going to get that one 4K set, which I'm a little honestly, I'm a little disappointed in that because it's just got 4 of them: the Invisible Man, the Wolfman, Dracula, and Frankenstein. That's all it's got. No Creature from the Black Lagoon, no Bride of Frankenstein.
Bummer.
No. I know they're pretty. They're probably going to release a volume 2. That's probably
so. Wait, it's just
the
regular, like, what is it? The 6 film collection.
Well, no, it's just 4 of them. 4.
Right.
Only 4 of them that are in 4K. So
well, Creature wasn't in the original collection of the flagship movies either. I was always bummed on that because I had to buy it.
It was in the it was in the original 8 films that they put out on Blu-ray. It was included in there because I had that
on the Blu-ray, but it wasn't.
Yeah, I had that set, but then I sold it when I was getting all of them kind of separately. The ones that weren't included in those Essentials collection. So now I've got them all, but like I do want to get that 4K of it, but I'm kind of thinking, I want to see if eventually the 4K discs will wind up on eBay separately, and then I can combine them with the rest of them, because I just like that's so stupid that they only have 4 of them, and I have those
Well,
already
yeah,
on Blu-ray.
they should do every single one they have in the classic monster set in like 4K. On,
Yeah,
like, the whole
I mean,
entire
I
set.
think
that-
honestly
That's it, focus.
though, we've seen them about as cleaned up as they're gonna get. At this point, any difference in picture quality is gonna be because of your TV. And I will admit that is a difference, even with the DVDs, it was like, wow. So I could see getting them for that, but
well, and
I think 4K is
It
gonna
was
be
very
the
crisp there.
I'll say this: Universal, with their Blu-ray restoration, they tend to have some of the best
No.
restorations.
I
I
think
will
just
say-
restoration in general for the legacy collections was done real nice. Like they took their time to make the movies look fucking good. Because you look at the trailer footage that's included on the discs, and
Well-
it's like, oh boy, that's how I remember them looking on
Yeah.
VHS. And
That's how it used to, yeah. And they found some footage that was cut out because back in the days when they had it, they edited out several scenes because of particular things. And so for years, it was lost, the
I
full
know.
version. So
Yeah,
it's
this-
great that they
this-
were able to restore it. And
This movie, even more so than Dracula, was very controversial. For
Yeah,
its
dude.
time. Like it made
kind of
people
understandably so.
It made people sick in the theaters, and then there was also the issue of the one of the most famous lines in the film, which is not in the book, but it's such an iconic line, is in the name of God, now I know what it feels like to be
Yeah,
God.
and the way
You know,
he
that-
delivers it is so fucking spine tingling.
Oh, I
dude.
know. He's in total delirium. But that line was censored, in many prints of it for a long time because it was blasphemous, and
they had to have that introduction by the director in order to because
yeah.
they were worried people would just run out of the theater, and they were just they were so frightened of that, and that's impressive. But also, it's also amazing to see this because so many films from those eras were lost, especially the early talkies like this one, because the talkies back in those days, you ran the film and then you ran the soundtrack concurrent. So you not only had to track down the film, but you had to track down the soundtrack with all the
Right.
talking on it.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
dude,
and
an interesting
supposedly-
point that gets made, and I think it's the beginning of the documentary on the Bride disc, is that this was at a time when talkie films were first becoming like a common thing, and James Whale and Boris Karloff changed the fucking world with a performance that's silent, basically.
Well, and actually, Dracula, just the earlier in that year, that film was released in a silent version to accommodate theaters that hadn't put in sound system
Right?
yet.
Yeah. It's crazy to think about that. In a large way, James Whale was still doing silent film stuff with this movie, even though it was a talking picture.
Well, and yet, he innovated in ways that Todd Browning had not, at least not with Dracula. Todd Browning would innovate in his own way with Freaks in terms of content and, shocking the audience and that kind of stuff.
I did want to mention another revelation that I remembered. Todd Browning also did a version of The Old Dark House. James Whalen also did a version of the Old Dark House as well, and I remembered that and think that your connection with the Freaks and whatnot is kind of interesting because that's another connection.
They followed, it
no,
seems
not-
like similar trajectories with their career or whatever, but did it just in slightly different ways,
Yeah. Well, and of course, if you want to talk about connections, famously, Bela Lugosi was going to play the monster, but he turned it down, and then it went to Boris Karloff. Although
I'm glad that he did.
Well, but Bela did play the monster later on in some of the
Yeah,
sequels.
once he was hurting for cash, he didn't mind putting on that fucking makeup. What a
Well, I mean,
douche.
and they kind of play it out in Ed Wood as far as that movie. which I mean I think they kind of amplify that a
Exaggerated.
little bit. They exaggerate. That's the word beyond, but it is kind of interesting because when that movie did cement Bela Lugosi in my mind, made him one of my father's favorite actors. To tell you the
Oh
truth.
yeah.
Dude, I mean, they may have like slightly exaggerated, but Bella was definitely down to do some bullshit in those later years.
Well, yeah, because he was a drug
He
addict
wasn't-
eventually.
He wasn't quite on that, like, what's it, oh, damn it. That
Yeah,
dude
he
that's
worked
in
with
like
Ed
every
Wood.
B movie. That old fucking guy, what's his name?
Charles
He's the
Lofton.
dad of, like, Carradine. Not John Carradine. Is it John Carradine? The dad.
I think it
Whatever,
was.
the dad Carradine. Yeah, that
Yeah.
dude would just fucking like do anything, and they would basically prop him up in movies later when he was so
Yeah,
old that it would be
John-
talked too
yeah,
much
John
that fucking
Carradine,
dentures
they would-
probably fall out of his mouth.
You could stick him in, your birthday video if you paid him enough,
I'm pretty sure you could pick that guy up and he would do a movie for you for like $50 and some McDonald's breakfast or something that you could chew down with his gums. Fucking, there's some embarrassing ones later on
That's
where he
basically what Al Adamson did with Lon Chaney Jr.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. Well, and well, that's kind of what like Eric Roberts does these days. You
little
pay
bit.
You pay his fee, you set up his teleprompters or cue cards or whatever, and he'll go for it. But,
I think that Bella would have ruined this. I think he would have. I don't.
It
think
would have been very different.
It would have been too close to Dracula to compare the two without coming out hard in favor of Dracula, because the performance just would have been better. And Boris, really, his whole look is what makes the monster as iconic as it is.
Yeah.
I mean, as Dave mentioned, we've seen Bella play the Frankenstein's monster, and it's okay. It looks like your dad in a Halloween costume.
Yeah.
And I can get through the movies and I do enjoy them, but holy shit, am I glad he was not the dude they chose, had do this movie.
It's important to note that the way that they look out of costume, that kind of helps to inform how they're going to look in costume.
Yeah,
because
Boris looks like a goddamn skeleton when he's
Yeah.
not in costume.
I was going to say, like, there's a reason why the monster looks the way he does and why the mummy looks the way he does. Because Bela or the Boris, looks so he looks very kind of intimidating and scary anyway. And Bela, was like when he was young, especially, he was a handsome guy. He was, exotic, foreign, like Dracula's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean the original costume test had him looking like the freaking Gollum out of that old movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it would not have been the fit for Frankenstein at all, and we saw that proven later on, which is good. I mean, I think that's one of the few series too in horror history where there was like that speculated first person for the role, and people probably wondered for years, and then when they finally saw it, they're like, no, yeah, they went with the right dude. I mean, it just would have been embarrassing, I think, if Bela Lugosi had done the first couple. Frankenstein, we'd probably only have the first couple, maybe not even the first couple, maybe just the first one, because it's well known that James Whale didn't want to do Bride, but to his credit, when he signed on to do it, he came in and like made a project and got serious about it. But
yeah, well, that's kind of like what Tim Burton did with Batman Returns. He made it a personal film, and that kind of gave him the energy to keep going with it. But yeah, well, and interesting,
and scared the shit out of the studio and made them take it away.
The little children, yes.
Yes.
The interesting to note that Boris Karloff, he did, as far as a one-off, he was the Mummy, which that first Mummy film was the only Mummy film with his character Imhotep. Then all the future ones were about a different mummy. So technically that was a one and done for him.
Well, and you pointed out in the chat that, the Mummy really is basically just plot-wise a carbon copy of Dracula, which is totally fine because the Mummy does its own like vibe with it and it makes it its own movie. But in an interesting way, we kind of got to see what each of those actors would do playing their respective like flagship characters. You know?
Yeah, well, because
we kind of got to see Boris do Dracula with the Mummy, and we got to literally see Bella do
the monster
Frankenstein later on.
Yeah, which and the interesting points of difference there is that with Boris Karloff as a Dracula-like mummy, Imhotep, the emphasis is placed not on what a dashing, handsome guy he is, a foreigner, exotic figure, anything like that. The emphasis is on the fact that he's got really dry flesh because he's, again, a mummy. He's got really dry flesh, but he's got a hypnotic voice and he's got hypnotic eyes, and he has an intimidating presence to him. It's not that he's like sexually attractive to the ladies or anything like that.
I'd probably throw him a piece.
Or that he has the foreigner appeal to him or anything like that. Any kind of hint of exoticism. It's the idea that he's this imposing figure, but who is nonetheless hypnotic, and that's a key difference.
Yes, again, I mentioned in chat, they trade places regularly for me. Go ahead, Brandon.
I was just saying, which kind of is, I feel like that was an inspiration even today in some aspects of characters like, say, even Apocalypse with the X-Men. I always think of him as the old school Universal Mummy.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, there's definitely outside of even horror inspiration that's been drawn from a lot of these characters for sure.
What do you think, Forrest? Shall we bring up the production end of this, or have we really covered that a lot?
I feel like we have covered that along with special effects.
Well, then let us go into our favorite scenes. Then.
Well, before we hop there, though, I do want to point out a lot of the dope painted backgrounds. I'm always a fan of that shit. There's a lot of really good sets in this film. The mountain set, the windmill sets, everything in it, even Frankenstein's laboratory. All that stuff is amazingly well done. And
castle,
we see a lot more of it in Bride.
And the music was well done for the time.
It really was.
I agree.
But there's just something about those painted backdrops behind those awesome fucking sets that they built. I'm a fan of that. I don't know why. Even that Dune miniseries they did on TV back in the day, like, I just love a good painted background, and I think films like this really sort of set the bar pretty well for that. And that cemetery scene is the stuff of black metal nightmares, and I absolutely love it.
Oh, totally. I love that graveyard, which and you mentioned the Wizard of Oz, which was the ultimate in painted backgrounds for Technicolor.
Yes, another great one.
And this is the ultimate in painted backgrounds for black and white.
For sure.
And again, another shout out as well to the makeup artist behind the monster who created the look that became so iconic. And another shout out artist to the Baron's costumer.
Hell yes, dude. That guy is the best, and I really hope that he got that lump on his neck biopsied at some point to see what the fuck was in there, because after I noticed it this viewing, I could not look away. Get it checked out. It's scarier than the monster, bro.
It's probably a goiter.
Probably.
Yeah, definitely. We should definitely get on with those. What was it? Those
favorites.
Yes.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, that's all I really had to say on it.
All right. So Jake, favorites.
Well, I guess I would have to say that this is the kind of movie where one might note most iconic, which is probably got to be the "It's Alive." Is probably the most iconic moment in the film. But in terms of favorites, the Baron just amused me. Just about every scene, even though he was a pompous ass.
He was awesome with his old dude voice. He
was so blustery and so he was so clearly full of hot air that just
stuffy.
It was amusing.
Yeah, he doesn't give a shit. He's just about wearing his fez and smoking his pipe and getting the town folk wasted.
Drinking his son's wine.
Right.
So full of hot air that he needs to be tethered down, or else he'd fly
His-
away.
His biggest concern is getting his family line started.
All right, over to you, Kroll. Favorites?
Yes. My favorite scene was the fire, the windmill on fire. It was just so awesome. I love fire, and that was an awesome scene. I actually think iconically, the torches, is a very iconic scene for me. But I love the mill the best, and I agree the Baron was great in everything. He was a pump his ass though.
He is. He's kind of that character you don't appreciate as a kid, but then once you get older, you're like, this dude just wants to fucking party, and I'm
Right.
about that, you know?
That's how I feel about Catherine O'Hara in a lot of her roles.
Yeah. Do you have like a guest fez that I can wear? Because I want to get in on this, you know?
All right, over to you, Brandon. Favorites?
A lot of the stuff with the character of Frankenstein himself was a lot of my favorite. I mean, that line is like, "Crazy am I? We'll see if I'm crazy or not." And just the way he looks, the intensity that he delivers the line, it's just that's just a level that you don't usually see in acting then, or even now in many cases. It was just you felt that. You felt that slight, like that person who is normally sane teetering on insanity and obsession. I love that line, and of course, I'm saying it's alive, alive. Yeah, that's just going to always be in the lexicon because of, well, you know why. But yeah, that's probably mine.
Actually opens my first track that I ever did with Rebel Gaming Club is that sample from this film right here. And at one point I did have the whole, in the name of God, now I know what it feels like to be God. I had that sampled too, but it was just too long and it felt redundant after I already had the most notable sample prior to it. Good times.
All right, over to you, Dane. Favorites?
Man, there's so many favorite moments to pick from. I think for me, it would be tempting to. My favorite shots are probably the
yes,
in the windmill, probably the interior. Those are my favorite shots. But as far as an actual scene, I think the one that kind of hones in on the tragedy of the story, which would be the monster and the girl at the lakeside at the shore. That to me is the story of Frankenstein. Ultimately, it's this good souls that are doomed to tragedy because of their own hubris or just the cruelty of others, or just circumstance, that seems to convey that pretty effectively and in a short amount of time. The only nitpick I would have about that is that that water seemed pretty shallow, so I imagine that kid probably could have stood up and been okay.
Yeah, I mean, all the monster was holding her down.
Yeah,
well, she was like 3 feet off. Like she could have just really dummy paddled somewhere to the side of him and got out of the water. I guess I just look at that as natural selection. See you later, kid.
Right. I feel like a little bit the ass for thinking this, but like I see that scene, and I flash to Little John in the creek bed and Robin Hood Men in Tights. Help me, Robin! I can't swim.
Or its equivalent in Young Frankenstein, where she's like, "Oh no, what shall we throw in now?" And then she whizzes right through the window.
Yeah.
But the monster looks right at the camera right before that happens, which is great.
It does start the monster's habit of just yeeting people, though, which obviously we see in spectacular fashion at the end of the movie, and then he opens the next movie chucking an old lady down a well, basically.
Well, you gotta toss stuff when you're that big and strong,
Chuck those bastards.
Better to be tossing.
Float, just like the kid.
Better to be tossing people than tossing salads. You know what I mean?
Hey, eating ass is fucking, it's fashionable now, right? I imagine back in these days it would be like, "Excuse me, my lady, perchance can I dine on your derriere?" You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So-
that's. I'm gonna use that.
Feel free.
What about you, Mo?
Dude, they're like, like Dane said, it's hard to narrow it down. This is one of those rare movies where I actually do nerd out on the filmmaking parts of it, in the second one especially. It's primitive, but it's effective, man. I mean, there's like a lot of cool shots in both of these movies, and I keep talking about the second one because I went right into that after this. And I guess that's one thing I did want to mention is how like marathonable. Pretty sure that's not a word, but we're patenting it right now. Every time I watch Universal monster movies, I always want to watch a bunch more of them. It's like I can't just stop at one. So definitely what I'm gonna be continuing to do after this. But I don't know, man. I mean, there's a lot about the way it's shot that I love. Especially the scenes that I noticed kind of mirrored up with newer movies that are also a big part of my childhood, like Castle Freak or Return of the Living Dead, Night of the Living Dead, things like that. Reanimator, all that good stuff. I mean, currently in my mind, I'm also running this entire version of this movie shot for shot with like Barbara Crampton and Jeffrey Combs in there, and it's awesome in my head. So
hell, even Sting got a shot at Frankenstein with the bride.
No, we could have Sting play the monster in the Jeffrey Combs version or something. I don't know. But my favorite moment outside of the bear and stuff in the entire movie, I think, really does have to be like a tie between like them in the windmill and the part where Frankenstein is explaining the whole gimmick about like, life and death is just the thing I settled on, kind of like I just wanted to figure out an unknown in the world. As long as I can accomplish that, people can call me crazy and I won't care. And that kind of precedes the part that Brandon chose where he's like, crazy am I? We shall see, basically,
Yeah.
like, and he takes them up there and shows them the shit, and it really makes that a lot more like you can identify with it a little bit.
Well, and the best science fiction, especially the best science fiction horror, it can't just be about the horror. It's also got to be about the thrill of discovery. Like the best ones have that. Like both
Yes.
both versions of The Fly have that. Creature from the Black Lagoon has that, and that's where the horror comes from, being the contrast to the good part, which is the good part is the discovery and the what this could mean for humanity and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, we touched on it briefly when we were talking about Dracula last week or whatever, but the age of exploration, I think Dane pointed out, was like a sort of thing that overlapped with the time this stuff was written originally or whatever. So it's I think Frankenstein does a better job of getting that across than maybe Dracula or stuff like that. There's very much an explorer vibe to that whole thing, and I love it. And I think there even are sitting in like some posh sort of like meeting of the minds type place when they're having that conversation, and he's trying to tell them.
And let's not forget a key character from the book who is in barely any of the adaptations is Captain Walton, who is the person through whom we initially start the story, because he's an explorer trying to find the fabled Northwest Passage, through the Arctic.
Yeah.
And then that's where he finds Victor Frankenstein. That's where Victor tells the rest of the story, because he's looking for the monster who ran up into the Arctic to get away from him. And to get away from humanity. But point is, there's a very much a thrill of exploration, a thrill of discovery, all that stuff. So he's in danger of falling down the same path as Victor. But again, that character's barely in any of these adaptations.
It sounds like a rad character, and it sounds like we were kind of cheated by not having him in this film, because he probably would have had a sweet beard.
He does in the few adaptations I remember him being in, like in the
all I need to hear.
In the 94 Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, he's got quite the beard.
Hell yeah. You run a comb through it in a couple of scenes. Anyways, on to the
You'll be tossing salads by the end of it.
All right, over to you.
So,
Mo.
it's actually mine.
No,
but,
yes, Dave, favorites.
I would have to say that my favorite scenes are anything dealing with the torches. I do like the part where he's offered flowers from the little girl, and he's like all giddy that she's like giving him these flowers, and she shows him that they can float, and then he's like, oh, so let's see if you can float.
I mean, you can't blame him. But...
No, but I, of course, love the "It's alive" and the whole wonderment that Frankenstein goes through, where he's like, haven't you ever looked at the stars and wondered what's what, and just the sheer fact that that man can almost become a god. These are the concepts that kind of go throughout this film, and I love that.
It's hard
I love
not
the
to
fact
get
that
swept up in that.
no, it's definitely not. I mean, there are people who are always trying to strive to discover things that we cannot explain, like how can we extend life? How can we cure cancer? How can we cure AIDS? These are, if we didn't have people like this, then we wouldn't have been able to cure very many diseases or anything like that. So on that extent, I can see someone going this far and this beyond.
Yeah.
But in that day and age, it was not cool to question what God told us in the scripture, So what he was doing at that point in time was spiritually wrong in a lot of people's mind.
It would have caused friction, dude. And like, it seems like the blasphemy was intentionally kind of put in there, because in the second movie, I guess there was a part where Frankenstein was supposed to see like this crucified Jesus and think it was like some other persecuted person, and he was supposed to rip Jesus off the cross and like try to save him, but the censors weren't having that, and they knew it, so they changed it to somehow more blasphemous, him knocking over this statue of like the Pope or some shit. Basically.
Well, and not only that, but they toast to a new age of gods and monsters, which a great line, not in the books anywhere, but a great line.
Amazing.
Well, but there is a parallel in the book in so far as Victor's great influences are a bunch of alchemists that are at that point in his studies, and of course, especially now, regarded as being, non-scientific. But in many ways, alchemy was kind of the precursor to what would then become modern science. But he was.
I mean, he created a tiny mermaid in a jar. Sold. Sign me up for more of those magic.
Yeah, that was kind of weird in Bride of Frankenstein when they do the homunculi. Those little people. I was like, again, we're getting way far away from the book by that point. But I was like, but that does have a tie to real life, because a homunculus in alchemical thought is the idea of a small person, and so
or
that's
your daughter mixed with a dog. Full Metal Alchemist.
All right.
There you go.
That was awesome. That was awesome.
Tammy, what about your favorite scenes?
My favorite was actually when before Fritz screwed it all up, when he was showing the doctor the monster, and he was having him walk around, and then he showed him light, and he was looking at the light, and he told him to sit.
Yes.
And he sat. I liked that whole thing because it was so simple, and he was trying to show that he's not a monster. I can teach him. He can learn. He's, that was the part I liked about
It's amazing, dude. I mean, that's really the first moment in the film too, where you really get to see Boris Karloff's like acting shine through, and like from that moment forward, you know that he's owning the character of that monster. You know.
Oh yeah.
It's also the best scene where you can see like the little weird braces they have tied to his forearm. Have you ever noticed that?
Nope.
Well, they're there, dude. It looks like almost like a hacksaw blade tied to his arm or something, like just a metal strip.
Yeah, I thought that he had a watch on at first at one point in time. And then I
think
realized
maybe I used to think that too, you know? Because it does look like it could be a watch like hanging off to the side because they dug that arm up out of a fucking grave or something, you know?
Definitely. Well, I think at this point we can start with our outros, correct?
Oh, I
So-
should just need to go get my favorite.
Oh,
Favorite.
Sure.
Yeah, for me, I would probably say my favorites. Actually, I would probably say when the monsters first comes alive, it's just an iconic moment. Also, like
Really
when the monster first he walks backwards and turns around when he first comes out of his hole, his cell.
It's cool. I still, dude, I mean, I get it. Like I said, I think it works in the camera better than it does in your logical mind because it's like, why the fuck would he walk up all those stairs backwards? You know?
Maybe because the way his feet were so clunky that he had to walk backwards.
Yeah, I just
Honestly,
thought he didn't get the hang of it yet. You know. and
Yeah,
then
so
turned
that's
around.
more of a real world thing, and also they wanted that moment where he turns around and looks, and the camera can like catch his face and be like, "Oh my god," you know.
Yeah,
But it's just,
I mean,
It's
he almost
probably
has
like-
platform shoes on, so it's like
there might have been some real logistics involved, but that and the dummy on the windmill are the only parts
Yeah.
that it's like I have some problem with nowadays in terms of like the just. I get it; they're both iconic, you know, and there's nothing not awesome about a dude getting yeeted onto a windmill blade, but they could have built the dummy up a little bit more, you know. Most of those dudes had been to like war at that point, so you'd think that they would know what a body looked like. Or
at that
might
point
look
in
like.
time, there was an illusion of a body, and people didn't think twice about it. Now, years later, people are looking at it like, "Oh yeah, that's dummy."
It's still horrendous, dude. And my kid was like fucking triggered by the fact that, you know, Henry was still alive, let alone not paralyzed from the neck down in the second movie, you know, because it's like, what the hell? He got thrown onto a windmill blade and broke in half, and he's just sitting in bed at the end of the movie.
They wanted to bring him back, I guess.
He got
He got the superhero Marvel DC treatment, you know, where you should be dead, but they just brought him back.
Healing gene, yeah.
yeah,
I got better.
you could see. Yeah, I got better. Actually, I was reading a comic a couple days ago. It was very amusing where Tony Stark is giving a press conference and Betty Brant's like, the Bugle has had to print 7 retractions in the obituary department on you alone, Mr. Stark. it's like, yeah, that's par for the course for them.
Well, let's hear from you, Jake. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. I'm Kotobukijake. I'm the co-host of SeptumSin versus the World, where basically we just go on about all kinds of physical media, mostly movies and anime and, you know, well, DVD and Blu-ray, I suppose, as far as the gist of the channel. And, of course, we had a lovely discussion last night on Psychopaths, which was a fun anime to talk about. And I'm just a movie fan, collector, what have you. Sometimes try to dabble in actual filmmaking when I can. I've got a couple of Kickstarter projects I've thrown some money at, so we'll see how that turns out. And also just spending most of my time that I'm not trying to watch stuff working. All right.
I hear you. In any case, let's go to you, Carl. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm 48. I'm a fan of movies. You know, TV shows, movies, all that stuff. I'm not a collector. I have everything on streaming, which is good and bad. But I do have most things at my fingertips anytime I want, which is great. I thought of that when I was a kid that we should have that kind of system, and it's finally here.
We just didn't know it was going to kill the video store.
Yeah.
Unfortunate side effect.
Yeah, unfortunately. I'm also a big video game nerd and love video games of all kinds and stuff too. So that's basically me.
Okay. Going over to you, Brandon. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, firstly, I think Kroll is going to be featured on a couple of full moon discussions that we're going to be launching here soon. So we'll talk more about that in my outro. But yeah, dude, I have to do a little something with that Dr. Mordred since we had some technical difficulties, and the commentary track I did for that movie just recently was not recorded. So
very cool. Well, I'm SeptumSin of SeptumSin versus the World. We like physical media. We do a lot of stuff on physical media. We kind of dialed it back a little bit. We had to cancel one of our Let's Plays that we were doing and a couple other things, but we still do some pickups, occasional reviews, and we also have a special Halloween episode where I went through every horror game I beat, and I rated them on a tier system just to say these are the ones, and you can see how well they hold up from the NES all the way up to modern systems. So that's something to look forward to on Halloween.
Is Sweet Home on there?
Sweet Home is not. I never beat it.
Gotta do it, dude.
What about you, Dane? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, I am Dane Kyle. I'm an independent filmmaker out of Charlotte, North Carolina, as well as a film educator on my channel Dangerous Arts, DANEJUROUS. It's basically my name and, kind of the act of conjuring, basically. Conjuring forth dangerous arts. And, I have done a series called Oztober all this month. Hopefully, those of you who have seen it have enjoyed it. But
it's amazing.
Yes, very, very educational.
Thank you.
Yeah, one of the best things I've seen since discovering Defunct Land.
Oh,
and gotta love the invisible girl, the imaginary girlfriend too.
Yeah.
A very fun series.
My imaginary girlfriends are coming for Brian Lowry for his comments on Tin Man. So Oztober has been going all month. It's almost over, which is hard to believe. I've been making preparations for the next series, which will be April in Wonderland, and that'll be.
Felt like October went by quick this year.
I know it really did, but I'm making preparations for 30 reviews of Alice in Wonderland related adaptations, and of course, major thanks to Brandon for ripping the ones that he has in his collection to help with gathering footage and all that.
Can't wait for those.
Yeah,
I love Alice in Murderland.
That movie. Oh, that's such. Talk about so bad it's good. That one was basically, if you ever wanted to see what a porn movie would be like without the porn scenes in it, then that's basically what Alice in Wonderland was.
If you want to send me a link, I won't complain.
Oh, it's great because it's awful, but it's wonderful. But like, you know what I mean, right? The acting is like porno movie level. And a lot of the situations, it's like, oh, they would not have to go
Oh.
that far for this to get into porno
So-
territory.
So this would be the literal version of in The Big Lebowski, where she's like, "Oh God, you can imagine where it goes from this."
He
He
fixes,
fixes
the
the
cable.
cable.
Little bit, yeah, little bit.
Dude, it probably exists out there. I mean, I saw once a full length like remake of Thelma and Louise as a porno film. It was called On the Run.
Well, I am covering Alice in Wonderland 1976, which is a porno, but it's a 70s one, so it's like it's a musical. It's got wacky music. It's really really funny, and but the weird part is that it's like a raunchy sex comedy that just happens to have some hardcore footage inserted into it.
They would do that.
Inserted.
Yeah,
Oh, how you put
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Inserted in.
But it's like it's clearly shot after the
Sometimes
fact.
with no lube. Yeah, it just
Yeah,
is blatantly
that's
not
what
the
I
same
mean.
movie.
It's like
You know.
clearly they didn't necessarily originally intend it to be there, and they just said, "Oh, okay, we'll put that in there if we want to get into the, 42nd Street theaters or whatever." But it just it's kind of weird though, because again, the rest of it's definitely a raunchy film, but it wouldn't necessarily count as porn if it weren't for those inserts. But then meanwhile, Alice in Murderland's kind of the total opposite, where you're like, this feels like it's got porno scenes.
Yeah, the only thing stopping it from being porn is those inserts.
Exactly. But like the rest of it, you're like, oh yeah, the acting, the dialogue, it's like, yeah, I know where this is going. They just happen to have cut those scenes out.
I'm sold. So if anybody wants to
I'll
slide
send
that
you,
in my inbox,
I'll send you a link. I'll send you a link to it right now.
Insert it in his inbox.
Yeah, I'll send you a link to it right now because it's on YouTube. But yeah, I look forward to that one.
Wait! It's up on YouTube.
Yeah,
that just makes it even better.
Yeah, here
but they'll ban one of my thumbnails because it has
a
booby in it.
I'll put it in the big chat so everyone can see it. It's well worth it though because it's so bad, but it's amazing.
I actually enjoyed Once Upon a Time in Wonderland, the Once Upon a Time spinoff show. I'm sad they took it off quick. I actually liked it, but yeah, that's a loose adaptation.
We mentioned to you Miyuki-chan in Wonderland, and that one has a little bit of an itchy vibe to it as well.
Oh God, yeah. I did reacquire that for Dane's project so that he could view it.
Yeah, I downloaded all the ones that you'd uploaded. So.
Yep, that's in there.
I want to see Alice Cooper in Wonderland.
I would love to see that too.
That'd be awesome.
That would just rule.
But yeah, I got a lot on my plate though because I want it to be like Oztober but bigger and better.
It's so weird that Alice Cooper has remained one of the most wholesome characters of that era, where it's like when you flip it around to the 90s, Marilyn Manson. I mean, we don't got to go into detail, but
Mo, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
My name is Mosley. I do a channel called Drunken Master Studios, which for the last 9 months has been just taken over by Full Moon Madness. So that's essentially the series that I run. That's the channel at the moment and for the foreseeable future. We have our, Full Moon Fan Fest that we did. A couple of these dudes, Dave and SeptumSin, respectively, both participated in that. Pretty rad fucking time. And we have kind of taken the month off for the most part after that so that I could focus on doing my Halloween marathon, which I've watched a ton of fucking movies for. It's been amazing. And I'm about to launch into a pretty hefty Universal Monsters marathon on account of doing this right now. So if you want to follow me on social media, it's just Mosley. I'm pretty much the only one. So just find me and we'll do it. In terms of like future content, basically, eventually once I do my Halloween pickups, I'm going to work into some Grindhouse reviews, some stuff for some softcore sci-fi cinema, and just other Full Moon reviews as chosen by you. I tried to run a vote a little while back for the first major franchise that we will cover. Nobody really participated. I think it's because spooky season was kicking off and everybody was doing their own thing, or just nobody gave a shit. But if you'd like to vote, for full moon franchises, go ahead and put it in the comments here or on my videos. I mean, obviously the choices are Trancers, Puppet Master. We also got Evil Bong up in there, but that's kind of been held to the side because I plan on doing it with SeptumSin at some point. But we also have Killjoy and Ginger Dead Man and Witch House as a combined thing because they're each only 3 movies, so together they make a 6-pack. So if you guys want to vote on which of those franchises we cover first in the comments, that'd be rad. Or see me over at my channel and we'll collect the votes there too. That's it, bro.
I should have voted on that thing, but you know I would stick with Puppet Master if you can't get Evil Bong out there.
Yes, I mean, honestly, I'm down to do it, but nobody else voted. It was just my one dude, Don. He voted.
Dave, you look different.
I just didn't see it. That was the big
unfortunately, I kind of turned into a monster after watching Frankenstein. So, but my name is David Streggy. I am one of the founding fathers of Inside Movies Galore. So, thank you for coming along with us along this journey. It has been exciting and thrilling, and thanks for all of that. That we definitely love to talk about movies of all kinds. And vice versa. So we have some exciting films coming your way, which I'll hand it over to Brandon here in a moment. But first off, I also moonlight under a different channel called Delusions of Grandeur, where I go on about my own video pickups and my own video reviews. So check that channel out. But let's go over to my and introduce to you my lovely fiance Tammy. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
The mask is definitely an improvement, dear.
Yeah, thank you. I thought I looked myself.
Yeah, I like your spindly little chin hairs there.
It's stellar.
Twirling
Definitely,
with my finger.
Definite improvement.
I don't really have much to say about myself because, unlike all of you guys, I haven't done all the stuff that you have and everything. So there isn't much to say.
Tammy's
I like
an awesome werewolf mom that likes fucking Dracula books and really cool vampire movies from the 80s. She's also been known to read a fair amount of horror novels. And what else did we talk about when we hung out that one time?
Oh my God, well, right now it's winding down, but I have my car that I take to the car shows. So
yeah, she's a car enthusiast, automotive restorationist.
Which is kind of cool because which is kind of cool because this next Sunday, if Mo gets a chance to be along with us and Kroll here, we're going to be talking Christine with Boris.
Yeah, hell yeah.
I'll be there.
You know what you guys need to do is make that car from the end of Nightmare on Elm Street. That'd be fucking awesome. You guys could
Christine,
take that to horror
that's my favorite
conventions.
Stephen King book. I mean, Stephen King movie.
Christine's a great movie.
Restore yourself with Christine too. Have Dave get a job at a rival chicken shop as well as this Dollar Tree thing, and then we can get it going. Yeah.
Over to Brandon to tell us about the what movie we have in store for next week.
You totally should show up at your old job with a KFC bucket on your head or something.
No.
Well, do we want Forrest to do his outro first?
Yeah, Forrest should get his outro done. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
All right.
Sorry, Forrest.
All right. My name is Forrest Bennett. I'm an independent film producer based in Long Island, New York. Also a movie and comic book collector. If you go on my Instagram, under my name is not Gump, you can see all my recent comic book pickups. And I've always got something going on in the pipeline. I actually got a couple movies out on Vimeo. That I produced. You can check out, including Camp Murder and The Devil's Lettuce. And yeah, I've always got something going on in the pipeline.
Awesome. All right, Brandon, what's next week?
So we get out of our spooky month, And we go into November, where we have the long-awaited Mustache Matinee.
Woohoo!
And in the season of Mustache Matinee, we'll be covering the
Yes.
movie Mordecai every week, 5 times a week. And
Don't point that
Must
thing at
I?
me.
actually, it never got voted in, so
Aw.
surprisingly so. But we do have an interesting lineup.
It's all right,
so
sir. I've got another.
So, of course, these movies are all supposed to have some mustache relevance, except for Dustin's birthday, but we'll get to that.
To be
so on the-
honest, Mustache Matinee was a suggestion put forward by Jake many years and moons ago, and I
It feels
finally
like many
made the executive decision of saying, "Aha, November will be the
And
theme."
let the record show that I was a supporter of this from the very beginning. Like as soon
Yes,
as he
you were,
mentioned it
Mo.
in my presence.
Yeah, I heard about this
like,
before
yes.
I even joined it, and I'm like, well,
Yeah,
Smoking
I
the
told
Bandit's
Kroll
gonna be
about
in
this.
there.
That's how fucking awesome.
Now
Smoking the
that
Bandit's
does
definitely my
now
favorite
that does
mustache
mean that all of you must grow a mustache by next week. So,
Dude, I can't.
just so you know.
You know,
I've been trying
I'm
to
like the opposite of one of those dudes that grows a mustache. And looks
I
cool.
won't be here because I'm going to be out of town.
All you gotta
You're
do
not
is
gonna,
drink.
you're not gonna grow
All
a
you gotta
mustache
do
with
is-
us, Tammy.
All you gotta do is drink some milk and take a picture. Jeez.
So,
Dude, I can't
of
grow
course,
one. It looks like a rapist stash. Like it doesn't fucking work. You know? I look creepier with a mustache than I do without one.
That'd be
we
perfect.
actually do
Uh,
have
it-
the luck this month of having 5 Tuesdays. So,
Nice.
though Dustin's birthday is included in this month, we do have 4 weeks of mustache madness.
Woo.
And so we start on the 30th. Well, actually, we're going to go back and then come back to next week. So at the end of the month, we'll be covering Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which
Yeah.
apparently, according to the submitter, was due to Yosemite Sam being in the movie for a short period.
Weak
That must have struck him.
excuse.
I'm like of all mustache movies with Bob Hoskins, how did Super Mario Brothers not get voted in?
Right.
Right?
I do not know. I did
I
not vote for it
love
because I didn't
Roger
feel like it was
Rabbit,
a strong mustache movie, but it did get
Just
voted
tell
in.
us who did it, Brandon.
Although Roger Rabbit is quite furry.
Who put
It is a good film, which
You
is
put
probably
Roger
why
Rabbit
it
on
got
your
voted
list,
Yeah.
in.
and that
It'll be
must-
worth
Yeah.
discussing.
I want to know.
So-
Come on, who put Roger Rabbit in? Was it one of you?
Oh, Roger did. It was Roger's last act before leaving us. But he will
Are
be
you
back
fucking
to
serious? That's epic, actually.
he will be back to host it though on that week. He has
Fuck
guaranteed.
yes.
Well, it's because he's Roger, and it's about
Yes.
someone named Roger
Yes,
Rabbit.
Right.
I'm down
So,
now.
that's
Like
pretty-
before, I
that is
was
pretty
kind of
epic.
mad, but
On the
Yeah,
23rd, Dustin's only submission got voted in, and that was the 1980 movie Maniac.
Oh yeah, with,
I've heard
uh,
has
Title
quite a
character has
killer mustache in that
killer
one.
mustache.
with Joe Spinell.
Hmm.
possibly featuring the only mustache more horrible than the one that I can grow. So I feel like it's a good representation of those of us that do not have
So-
mustache genes like the rest of you. fine
Next
folks.
week is what movie again?
Oh, we're getting there, Dave. We're getting there. On the 16th, we get to cover the mysterious Captain Hook in the movie Hook.
Yes.
Which
Yeah.
is
Woo!
And that was my
Great
pick.
movie.
That was my pick.
yes.
It was
Pretty
mine
epic.
actually.
Good
That
pick.
is an epic stash.
Yeah, I was gonna say like
Hook
Captain
was
Another
mine.
Bob
Y'all
Hoskins
two can
film.
fight off of the over the
Well,
hosting.
Captain
duties
Hook.
there.
I'm pretty sure I submitted Hook, but
Okay.
I feel like
you
you did
listed
too. I
Dave
can't
as my
remember.
backup
Okay.
host.
What
I-
day
I-
is that on?
Now that I realize that we have 2 Bob Hoskins films, I feel your pain, Forrest.
I feel like you did submit it personally, but yeah, any
Yeah, how did we
interpretation-
not have Mario in here? That's
What
Any-
day are you doing Hook on?
Hook
on
will
the
be
yeah, that's gonna
third
be on the
week, right?
16th.
Yeah.
16th.
16th.
So on the 9th, we're going to be celebrating Dustin's birthday. So we're going to
Okay.
take a break from mustaches to discuss Alligator 2. And if you want to prepare, we did cover part 1 on this channel. and also
I am also going to
Komodo.
do my best to deep fake a mustache onto that alligator for the movie.
I was gonna say just
So
put,
if I can get it done, you guys will receive the first.
I'll have to get a
print
mustache
of-
clip art for the
Yeah.
for the
Yeah,
cover for that.
Yes.
that's what I was gonna say. Just
Everyone should just
Yes.
slowly grow a mustache till the end of the month. At
I'm
least.
down, dude. It's just
Hey, I've been
mine's
trying
not
for
going to
over
be
30
good
years
to
to
look
build a
at.
mustache. So
well, it's called No Shave November for a reason, right?
It's actually called Movember, which even makes it even more humiliating for me. But it's just it's terrible, dude. I wish I could grow a mustache. If any of you guys have secrets to it, please let me know.
I'm ready for your baby face Dahmer mustache. Okay.
I'll do it, dude. I'll even
So-
get the glasses.
you need to watch 1,000 Ways to Die in the West. They tell you how to grow a mustache.
Well,
Alright.
I had a mustache and a goatee for a while.
All right.
So the
I've never been
last
able to grow
one,
bro.
Last but certainly not least.
definitely not the least, we have a very iconic mustache, which is shared by two iconic figures, one the actor and one an individual that is kind of being parodied by said actor, and that is the great dictator, the essential Charlie Chaplin film. So that's
Mhm.
what we've got coming
Great.
up next.
I
A
would-
truly iconic film, so it's going to be quite something. We're jumping from
Actually, great
iconic to
film.
iconic.
That was my suggestion.
Mhm.
Which, I would
Yes.
like to make it clear that
I concur.
Charlie Chaplin had the Hitler mustache before Hitler did, and you know,
It was a
and I would-
popular style at the time.
it
Yeah.
was, and I much prefer it on Chaplin. I have to say.
Yeah, I agree. Chaplin.
I don't know what the hell you would call that nowadays, though, like the Taternator or something like that. Like it just really it looks like a
Every
little tater
human being
tot,
on
you
Earth
know?
knows that is the Hitler mustache. Even
Pretty
though
much, yeah.
he didn't originate it, but everyone knows it as that.
Yeah, I think
so-
that mustache became mostly extinct after Hitler.
Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
much. Except
Pretty
for
much.
J. Jonah Jameson, but that was on purpose because he was supposed to be like a parody of every bad boss ever, you know.
So do
Pretty
any of
Hitler
you
was the
guys
ultimate
have
bad
one
boss.
that you submitted that you wish was nominated? Because mine would definitely be Quigley Down Under. I think that may be good.
Oh, I
Well,
was hoping for Marx Brothers films, but we didn't get any
Yeah.
of the ones that
I-
suggested.
I was
Go
gonna
with-
I was gonna submit Duck Soup, but I decided against it because Groucho Marx has a grease paint mustache, so it doesn't count.
It's still a stash
It's
of
still a
sorts.
stash.
Of sorts.
No, I.
But it's
stand
not
with
real.
Wayne.
It's a grease paint
It's
mustache.
not
But I-
real.
I will. Of course, the ones that most
I resent
fully
that
ins-
remark.
the ones that most fully inspired the topic in the first place were Mordecai and the glorious stash that Hercule Poirot sports in Kenneth Branagh's Murder on the Orient Express.
That wasn't in
Neither of
the
which got in.
I know.
See, the whole
I
beauty
can't
of the
believe that
mustache
nobody submitted
matinee
Burt
is
Reynolds
that
and
What's
Smoking
that?
the Bandit.
we did, dude. It just didn't get voted in.
Oh, Smoking
Yeah.
the Bandit got submitted, yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's
I
when you say mustache, I just think of Burt
That's
Reynolds.
another thing. We got no Burt Reynolds, no Sam Elliott, no
I
Tom
did
Selleck.
put in Smoking the Bandit. So
You
Yeah.
did.
Yeah,
and I
but
tried
we did,
to-
we did have Yosemite Sam.
I was almost
You know
going to
what?
nominate Tombstone, but
I was gonna say
Ah.
I would be okay with just taking out Who Framed Roger Rabbit and putting Tombstone in there because not just Sam Elliott, but like all the leading guys pretty much have wicked mustaches.
We have to
down
go
to
with
do
what the
Roger
votes have
Rabbit.
been.
Yeah.
That's true. Well, but we can always talk about Tombstone some other time. But like
And we
as far
and
as
we could-
mustaches, holy crap, there's a ton of them in
There
there.
were a
And
lot
we
of that tied afterwards, so
and-
yeah, you
and-
can always revisit.
But that, yeah, it just tells us that we have a lot of choices next November.
Yep.
Yeah. Yes,
right?
that's what I was just about to say. Like,
or
this is
Mustache
only
Matinee
the
might
beginning.
come even sooner. You never know.
I think there are
Mustache
certain
Matinee Part
legendary themes that should be,
Mustache
year by
Matinee
year.
should definitely be honored year by year.
Yes, Mustache Matinee is one that should go on
Nice.
to be.
Tombstone would definitely be in the running for like.
If
best
anything,
mustache movie.
just to make Dustin sigh. Oh, geez, are we really doing that?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I was
That's
hoping to get some
exactly.
of the Ghibli stuff in there because they have some epic
Oh, yeah.
mustaches in those.
Oh, yeah.
films.
they do.
When we were hitting like the 10-year anniversary of this, and Dustin was there, like I finally.
And then when he
started
looked at the
joining
list,
year 7, you know,
and then
that's
when
gonna
he
be
looked at,
awesome.
and then when he looked at the list, it was like, oh, I guess we have a better selection here than I thought we were.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of
Mustache
iconic movies have
trophies to
mustaches.
give out to people that have submitted the best movies. Like we have a mustache trophy.
Well, I really think Tombstone should be at least a nominee for best mustache movie because of how many of them there are, and that's like one of the ultimate like guy movies, like stereotypical.
Yeah, bro.
guy
The
movies.
mustache awards will happen for sure. These guys did their own Grammy or
Fine,
not
I will
Grammys,
find
Oscars
a-
this year, so.
I will see if I can find a trophy and mount one of those googly eye mustache things on top of it, and then
It
it
has
has
to
be
be
the
like a
trophy.
bowling
And-
trophy, except without
and-
any of the
Casey, and
bowling.
that's
Whoever
the,
has
Just a
the
dude, like,
the most debonair mustache by the end of the month, I will send to that person.
I'm
And,
fully committed to supporting every ounce of this thing, even though I don't grow a good mustache. So that should tell you how good of an idea it is.
Well, there's always a marker.
Well, either
All right.
case, I think we've got we had an interesting
Right.
show and a great Halloween season.
Mhm.
So you all join us as we talk about mustaches in November with an iconic one in, again, The Great Dictator.
Mhm.
You know what's a
Yeah.
fucking disgusting like description for mustaches that I just came up with right now? Especially if you're in like the porn business, is the whisker. You know what I mean? Right? You get what I'm saying?
Or the whiskler.
yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
I don't know what that
We
was.
gotta for the thumbnails of the alligator ones. We gotta put mustaches on the alligators.
Right.
Can you put one on
Yeah.
me? That's
A Rocky
you know, at least-
Rococo's mustache. There we
'cause
go.
I'm never
Yeah,
gonna
there you
grow
go.
one worth looking at, but if you could put one on me that's worth looking at, I'd be appreciative.
Well, good night, all.
Good night, all.
Happy trails.